The silent caller. It started about 6 months ago, and I've been living with the fear ever since. I'm not exactly sure why I'm sharing this now. Maybe I just need someone to tell me I'm not crazy, or maybe I'm hoping someone has an answer. I don't know, but I'll start from the beginning. I used to live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but it was cozy, and it felt like home. I was living an ordinary life, work, the occasional meet-up with friends, and then back to my quiet apartment. Everything was fine until I started getting those calls. The first call came at 2:07 a.m. I remember the time because the sudden ringtone startled me awake, and I squinted at the screen. It was an unknown number. Groggy and annoyed, I answered it, but no one spoke. All I heard was faint breathing. After a few seconds, I hung up, thinking it was some kind of prank. I brushed it off, but the calls didn't stop. Every night around the same time, my phone would ring. Always the same number. Always the same silence and breathing. I tried blocking the number, but the calls kept coming through, just from a different one. It was relentless. I thought about changing my number, but I was stubborn. Why should I have to go through the hassle? One night, as I was lying there, waiting for it to happen, I heard something new. A soft chuckle. It was brief, and then I heard a whisper. "You shouldn't have left the door unlocked." My heart dropped. I bolted upright and raced to the front door. It was slightly ajar. I'm sure I locked it before going to bed. With shaking hands, I slammed it shut and locked it again, double-checking every window and door. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next day, I installed security cameras outside my door. I needed to know if someone was out there. But even with the cameras, the calls didn't stop. They kept coming, every night. I watched hours of footage, but no one showed up on the tapes. The only thing I saw was me, checking the locks, pacing around in fear. I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. Without any evidence, there wasn't much they could do. "It's probably just a prankster," they said. "Change your number and stay alert." But it didn't feel like a prank. I started sleeping less and less, staying up until the calls came and then lying awake, waiting for something else to happen. I stopped meeting friends. They noticed how paranoid I'd become, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I started noticing little things in my apartment, a chair slightly moved, a book out of place. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then I got the photo. It was in an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a single picture of me, asleep in my own bed. The picture was taken from inside the apartment. My chest tightened, and I felt sick. Someone had been inside while I was there, asleep and vulnerable. I called the police again, showed them the picture, but there were no prints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. They left, telling me to stay with someone for a while if I didn't feel safe. I didn't want to bother my friends, so I stayed at my place, but I couldn't sleep. I started dozing off at work and coming home to the calls. I'd stare at the cameras, hoping to see something, anything, but it was just me and that same empty hallway. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's place. I didn't tell her the whole story, just that I needed a place to crash. The first night there was quiet, and I almost believed I'd escaped. But then my phone rang, the same number. I almost didn't answer it, but I needed to know. I pressed it to my ear, heart hammering in my chest. The breathing was louder this time, more deliberate. After a few seconds of silence, he spoke again. "Running away won't help." I screamed, dropping the phone. My friend rushed in, asking what was wrong. I told her everything, sobbing, begging her to check the security footage. But there was nothing. No one outside, no one near the house. He wasn't out there. He was somewhere else. It hit me then. This wasn't just some guy outside my door. Someone had hacked my phone or installed something in my apartment. It didn't matter where I went, he could reach me. I bought a new phone the next day, a new SIM card, everything. But that night, I got another call, the same number, the same breathing. I knew then I had to leave. I packed up and moved to a new city, found a new apartment, and tried to start over. For a few days, it was quiet. I even started therapy, hoping to deal with the trauma. I thought I was safe. But I was wrong. One evening, while chopping vegetables for dinner, my phone rang. I hesitated, then answered it, my hand trembling. Silence. Then, that same damn chuckle. "You didn't think I'd let you go, did you?" I dropped the phone, backing away as if it would jump at me. I was crying, gasping for air. It was all happening again. He'd found me. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep running forever. Part of me wants to just disappear, quit my job, leave everything behind. But would it even help? No matter where I go, I'm not safe. He'll always find me. I'm trapped, and there's no way out. If anyone has advice, please, I'm begging you, tell me what to do. I can't live like this. I'm scared that one day I'll answer the phone and he'll be standing right behind me. The wrong turn. I don't really like talking about this, but I figure if I put it out there, maybe I'll feel better. I'm not looking for sympathy or attention. I just want to share what happened to me a few years ago. I was working as a sales rep back then, traveling across different states for client meetings. I've always enjoyed driving alone. It gives me time to think. But that night, something felt different. It started earlier that day. I was driving through some back roads, trying to cut down on travel time. I noticed a car behind me keeping the same distance for a good 15 to 20 miles. Just when I was about to pull over to see what was going on, it vanished around a bend. I thought it was weird but brushed it off. A little while later, I drove through this stretch where everything went silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Around 10 p.m., I realized I'd taken a wrong turn and was totally lost. I remember feeling relieved when I saw a dim light in the distance. It was a small, run-down house with a single porch light flickering like it was struggling to stay on. I don't know why, but I felt this weird sense of dread as I approached. Still, I figured I'd just ask for directions and be on my way. I parked my car and walked up to the door. When I knocked, it took a while before someone answered. An old woman peeked out, her eyes wide with fear. I barely managed to get a word out before she started talking, more like stammering, really. She kept saying, "No one should be here," and "You need to leave, now." I tried to explain that I was lost and just needed directions, but she didn't seem to hear me. Her hands were trembling, and she kept looking behind me like she was expecting someone else. I heard something faint from inside, maybe a voice or a movement. Whatever it was, it made the hairs on my neck stand up. I took a step back, feeling completely unnerved. As I glanced up at the second floor window, I saw a shadowy figure standing there, staring down at me. My stomach dropped. But when I looked again, it was gone. I backed away slowly and hurried to my car, heart pounding. I looked back at the house one last time before driving off, and that's when I saw them. A group of people, maybe 5 or 6, were standing in the yard, completely still. All of them were just watching me. They weren't there a minute ago. I hit the gas, trying not to think about who or what they were. I drove as fast as I could, trying to shake off the panic that was clawing at my chest. I kept telling myself that it was probably some weird locals messing with me. But a few miles down the road, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I felt relieved. thinking I could flag them down and ask for help. But no matter how fast I went or how many turns I took, the car stayed the same distance behind me. I tried calling for help, but of course I had no signal. My GPS was useless, and the road seemed to loop back on itself. Every so often, I'd pass by the same twisted tree or a rusted road sign. I pulled over, determined to confront whoever was following me. But as soon as I stepped out of my car, the headlights went out, plunging everything into darkness. The silence was suffocating. After what felt like forever, the car's engine roared to life and it sped away, leaving me alone in the middle of nowhere. Shaking, I got back into my car, and that's when I saw it. A note on my windshield, written in messy, hurried handwriting. "Turn around now. Don't go back to that house." I didn't need to be told twice. I spun the car around and floored it, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and that place. But no matter which way I turned, I kept ending up on the same dark road, like I was caught in some nightmarish loop. I was starting to think I'd never get out when I saw it. The house, right in front of me again. I slammed on the brakes, my heart sinking. The porch light flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the overgrown lawn. And there was someone standing on the porch, a man this time. He was watching me, just like the others. I tried to back up quietly, but he started walking toward me, his face hidden in the shadows. My breath caught as more people stepped out from behind the house, slowly surrounding my car. I locked the doors, honking the horn, desperate to scare them off or get someone's attention. But it only seemed to draw more of them out of the woods. With no other choice, I floored the gas and swerved around the house, narrowly avoiding them. As I sped away, I heard something through the static on my radio, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." It was my own voice. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. I parked in front of a diner, shaking uncontrollably. Inside, I tried explaining what happened, expecting the locals to think I was crazy. But when I described the house, they all went pale. "That place has been abandoned for over a decade," an older man muttered. "Anyone who tries to get near it either goes missing or ends up in shock, rambling nonsense." Another person chimed in, warning me never to go back. I nodded numbly, just wanting to leave and put the whole thing behind me. But as I got back to my car, I noticed something on the dashboard, the same note that had been left on my windshield, folded neatly. I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something truly sinister that night. I still have nightmares about that house, about the people who stood there, watching me. I don't know what they wanted or why they let me go, but I'm certain that if I'd made one wrong move, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Now, every time I drive alone at night, I keep my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that house again. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I think I can hear the sound of footsteps outside my window. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know they're still watching. Word count, 1,000 words. The late night visitor. I'm not sure why I'm posting this. Maybe I just want to get it off my chest, or maybe I'm hoping someone out there will believe me. For context, I'm a college student living alone in a small, run-down apartment near campus. It's not much, but it's close to my classes, and I can afford it with my part-time job at a cafe. I usually get home late, especially on the nights I have evening classes, which end around 9 p.m. It's normally fine. I've always felt safe walking back, despite the dimly lit street and the flickering street lamp outside the entrance of my building. But things changed a few weeks ago. That's when I noticed something off. It started one night when I was coming home after class. The entrance door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open, but I didn't think much of it. As I reached my apartment, I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. Brushing it off as my imagination, I locked my door and glanced out of the window. That's when I saw him. A man standing under the street lamp, staring up at my window. He didn't move, didn't look away, just stood there. I convinced myself he was waiting for a ride or something. I closed my curtains and went to bed, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling I had. The next night, he was there again. This time, he was under a different street lamp, closer to the entrance of my building. I hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach, but I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was a neighbor or someone visiting. Still, I took a different entrance, one that led me around the back and through the side door. I peered out of the blinds when I reached my apartment. He hadn't moved. He was still looking up at my window, like he knew exactly where I'd be. I called the building security that night. They checked, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. Probably nothing, they said. Just some guy waiting around. They left me a number to call if he came back, but I could tell they didn't think it was serious. I decided to stay up that night, just in case. Around midnight, as I was mindlessly watching TV, I heard a faint knock on my apartment door. My heart stopped. I sat frozen, listening, but there was no second knock. I finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole, but no one was there. The following days were a blur. He showed up every night without fail, always standing under the street lamp. His presence became earlier each night, and he edged closer and closer. I reached out to the police again, but they were dismissive. The man hadn't done anything threatening, they said. They didn't have much to go on. I spoke to the building manager, hoping they could do something, but there was no record of anyone entering or leaving who didn't belong there. Even worse, the CCTV cameras had been broken for weeks. I felt like I was going crazy. One evening, I came home and found a note slipped under my door. It read, "Why won't you let me in?" My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone my apartment number. The building was supposed to have secure entry. How did he get in? Panic gripped me. I started skipping classes, refusing to leave my apartment. I even rearranged my schedule at work to avoid coming home late. My friends noticed, of course, but I brushed it off, not wanting to seem paranoid. Even on the nights when he wasn't there, I felt watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhere nearby, hiding in the shadows. I started hearing his footsteps late at night just outside my door. I'd rush to the peephole, but there was never anyone there. The silence became suffocating. Then, after a week of nothing, I found another note. It was on my bed this time. "I know you're afraid, but I'm not going anywhere." That's when it hit me. He had been inside my apartment. He had stood in my room, reading my fear like it was something to be enjoyed. I ran to the building manager, demanding answers. They checked the locks, the windows. Nothing was broken or tampered with. They said there was no sign of forced entry. I couldn't stay there anymore. I called the police and packed a bag, insisting on staying with a friend. They searched the place but found nothing. The man seemed to vanish into thin air. Maybe I was losing my mind. But a few days later, I went back to collect my things. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. A small stuffed animal I kept on my bed, a childhood toy, was now sitting on the kitchen counter. I never moved it there. Panic took over. I had to get out. I packed everything I could, desperate to leave. As I carried my last box to the car, I glanced up and saw him, standing across the street in broad daylight. He smiled at me, and for the first time, he waved. I dropped the box and ran back inside, locking myself in my apartment. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I just wanted to say goodbye. I moved in with a friend while looking for a new place. I changed my phone number and never returned to that building. The police looked into it but found nothing. No trace of him. But even now, I feel like he's still watching me. I get that feeling of being watched every time I'm alone. I hear his footsteps in my dreams. 2 weeks after I settled into my new apartment, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. It didn't say anything. It was just a photograph of me, taken through the window of my new place. The police were involved again, but there was little they could do. They told me to stay vigilant, to call if I noticed anything unusual. But I know calling them only draws more attention to me. I've thought about moving far away, maybe even dropping out of school, but I know deep down it won't make a difference. He'll always know where I am. I've received a few more letters since then. They're always blank. But each time I get one, it feels like he's reminding me of something. He'll always be out there, watching. Title: I think I was stalked by a fake delivery driver. I don't usually post stuff like this, but it's been haunting me for weeks, and I need to get it off my chest. I've been overthinking, retracing every step, but it always leads back to the same terrifying conclusion. I think someone's been watching me, someone I let get too close. I'm a guy in my mid-30s, living alone in a quiet suburb. Nothing special about me. I work long hours, come home, and unwind with TV or video games. I moved to this neighborhood a few months ago for a job, so I don't know many people around here. The isolation wasn't a problem at first, but things changed recently. I have a bad habit of ordering takeout late at night, especially when I've been working overtime. Usually, it's the same few places, but one evening I found a new restaurant's flyer under my door. It looked legit, offering a good deal, and I was too tired to care much. I ordered a burger and fries, expecting it to be just another meal. The delivery driver arrived faster than I thought he would. When I opened the door, something about him immediately felt off. He wore a cap pulled low over his face and wouldn't make eye contact. His voice was barely a whisper. "Your order," he said, handing me the bag. His hands were trembling slightly. I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe he was new or just having a bad day. I handed him the cash and quickly shut the door, brushing off the encounter as a weird one-off. But when I unpacked the food, I found an extra item, a small container of dessert, my favorite flavor. I hadn't ordered it. I remember staring at it, wondering if it was some kind of promotion or a mistake, but something about it seemed personal. I ate the meal but threw away the dessert, feeling strangely unsettled. Later that night, I took out the trash. I thought I saw someone at the end of my driveway, but when I blinked, they were gone. It was probably just my imagination. At least that's what I told myself at the time. The next evening, I found a plain cardboard box on my doorstep. No return address, no markings, just my name, written in black ink. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were photographs. Photos of me, in my living room, kitchen, and even my bedroom, taken through my windows. I felt my stomach drop. One picture showed me standing at the front door, handing cash to the delivery driver. His face was turned away, but I knew it was him. I could tell by the way he stood, the slight hunch in his shoulders. I called the restaurant immediately, but they claimed to have no record of my order, no driver like the one I described. I insisted, but they assured me they didn't have anyone on staff matching his description. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the place didn't even exist. I searched online, but there was no trace of the restaurant's name or flyer. It was like it had just vanished. I started checking my windows obsessively, making sure all the doors were locked. I called the police, reporting a possible stalker. They listened, but without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd keep an eye out. I felt more alone than ever, my skin prickling every time I looked out a window, expecting to see someone staring back. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a soft knock at my window, a barely audible tap. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stayed perfectly still, waiting for it to happen again. It did. Another gentle tap. I forced myself to look, but when I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing. No one. The next morning, I found another box at my door. This time, there was only a single photograph inside. It was a close-up of my bedroom window, taken from just outside. My curtains were slightly open. Written on the back, in the same black ink, were the words, "Next time, I'll come inside." I felt sick. I knew I couldn't stay there. I grabbed a bag and started packing. Just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Going somewhere?" it read, along with a live photo of me standing at my front door with my bag. My hand shook as I bolted the door and shut off all the lights. I grabbed a kitchen knife and hid in the bathroom, trembling. I dialed 911, barely able to speak, telling them someone was outside my house, watching me. The operator kept me on the line until officers arrived. They searched the area but found nothing, no sign of anyone. One of them suggested it might have been a prank or a neighbor messing with me, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They didn't take me seriously. Just as they were about to leave, one officer handed me something, a piece of paper he'd found on my porch. It was a copy of the receipt from my order that first night. It had my name, address, and at the bottom a handwritten note, "Welcome to the neighborhood." I left the next day, broke my lease, packed up everything, and moved in with a friend across town. I changed my number, made sure no one knew where I was. But it didn't matter. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Weeks later, I found a folded piece of paper in my new mailbox, the same black ink. It had my new address. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm thinking about moving out of state, but I'm terrified it won't make a difference. Wherever I go, I feel like they'll always know how to find me. If you ever get a knock at your window, don't look. And never, ever answer late-night deliveries from places you don't recognize. Update. I'm still getting messages and photos, each one closer and closer to where I am now. The apartment key. When I first moved into my new apartment, it felt like a fresh start. I'd just gone through a breakup and needed a change, so I jumped at the chance to get a place on my own. It wasn't anything fancy, a small one-bedroom on the fourth floor of an older building, but it was cozy. I quickly fell into a routine. I'd go to work, come back home, and unwind with some Netflix or a book. It was peaceful, and for a while, I really enjoyed the solitude. But a few weeks in, I started noticing little things that were off. There was this faint, unfamiliar odor in the living room. It wasn't strong enough to be disturbing, but it was just odd, like a mix of cologne and something else I couldn't quite place. I also started hearing footsteps in the middle of the night. I told myself it was just neighbors moving around, but the sound seemed so close, almost like it was coming from my own hallway. One morning, I found my keys on the dining table instead of the kitchen counter where I always left them. I brushed it off, thinking I must have just forgotten. But when it happened again a few days later, I started feeling uneasy. Then, one night, I came home to find a cupboard door in the kitchen slightly open. I never leave it that way. I laughed it off nervously. I'm just tired. I probably didn't notice it earlier. But a weird feeling gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake it. The following week, I got home and immediately knew something was wrong. The smell in the living room was stronger, more like a pungent cologne. My couch cushions were out of place, and a chair I hardly used was facing a different direction. Panic started bubbling up, but I tried to calm myself. Maybe I'd just brush past the furniture before I left for work, right? I walked through the apartment slowly, noticing more details. A bathroom drawer was left open. My soap dish had been moved. A pair of socks I hadn't even worn yet lay in the middle of the living room. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone, about to call a friend, but then hesitated. What was I going to say? That I thought someone was rearranging my furniture? I'd sound insane. Instead, I decided to set up hidden cameras in the living room and bedroom. It felt ridiculous, like I was being paranoid, but I needed to know what was happening when I wasn't around. I left the apartment for the weekend, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being watched as I walked out the door. When I returned on Sunday evening, I rushed to my laptop to check the footage. My stomach dropped as I watched a man, a stranger, use a key to unlock my door and walk right in. He moved around as if he belonged there. He didn't steal anything or break anything. He just touched things. He shifted my furniture slightly, went through my closet, even sniffed my clothes. He sat on my couch for hours, watching TV. And then he did something that made my skin crawl. He went into my bedroom and lay down on my bed. He stayed there for almost an hour before getting up, locking the door behind him and leaving. I felt sick, violated. I checked the lock. It was perfectly intact. I hadn't lost my keys. How did he get in? I called the police immediately, showing them the footage. They promised to investigate, suggesting it could be a previous tenant with a spare key, but it didn't make sense. How would a former tenant have known I'd be gone that weekend? I changed the locks that same day, trying to take back some control, but that sense of safety was gone. A few days later, the police called me back. They didn't find any signs of forced entry, and there was no record of a spare key being issued. It was like the man had vanished without a trace. They told me to stay vigilant, but I could hear it in their voices. They thought I was overreacting. I didn't sleep that night, staring at the front door, listening for any sound. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of my doorknob jiggling. My heart stopped. I lay still, barely breathing, listening as someone tried to open the door. Then, silence. I waited, gripping a kitchen knife I kept by my bed. Finally, I heard faint footsteps retreating down the hall. I called the police again. They came, did a sweep of the building, and assured me no one could have gotten in. I see you ain't seeing. The new locks are secure, they said. The next day, I noticed my kitchen window was slightly open, just wide enough for someone to slip through. I rushed to my laptop, dreading what I'd see on the footage. But this time, there was nothing. No man entering, no signs of intrusion, yet something felt wrong. I rewound the footage and noticed brief skips in the recording, like small segments had been deleted. He was still getting in. He was tampering with the cameras. I kept watching, feeling my throat tighten. Then, suddenly, his face appeared on the screen, just for a second. He stared directly into the camera. A chilling smile on his lips. He knew I was watching. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a few things and went to a friend's place. But even there, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every rustle made my heart race. I thought about moving out permanently, but a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if he follows you?" The final straw came when I got a text from my landlord. "Someone came by today asking about you, said he was a friend." I felt the blood drain from my face. I packed the rest of my belongings and moved out for good. As I drove away, I glanced up at the building one last time. There was a figure standing at the window of my old unit, watching me. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew it was him. I turned back to the road, hands shaking. I've never gone back to that apartment or looked at the footage again, but sometimes, when I'm alone, I still feel like I'm being watched, like he's somewhere nearby, waiting. The Party Crasher. I'm not usually a party guy. I'm the sort of person who prefers quiet evenings at home, maybe watching a movie or reading a book. But when my friend Alex invited me to a small get-together at his new place, I couldn't say no. It was just a handful of people, mostly mutual friends. and I figured it would be a good way to catch up. Alex had recently moved into a small, cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was one of those areas that felt safe and familiar, with well-kept lawns and friendly neighbors. As I parked my car a few houses down, I noticed someone standing by a tree. He was just out of reach of the streetlight, and I couldn't see his face clearly. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably nothing, but something about the way he stood there, almost too still, made my skin crawl. I glanced back one more time before heading inside. The figure was gone. The party was already in full swing by the time I got there. Alex greeted me with a grin and handed me a beer. The backyard was lit up with string lights, and a small group of people were chatting and laughing. It felt relaxed and easygoing. I found a spot by the fence and sipped my drink, trying to blend in. That's when I noticed him again. Standing just outside the fence was the same man. He was partially hidden in the shadows, his face still obscured. I froze, my grip tightening around my bottle. Was he watching us? I nudged Alex. "Hey, there's someone out there, by the fence." Alex frowned and looked over. His eyes narrowed. "Probably a neighbor or something. I'll check it out." He called everyone inside for a moment, and we joked nervously about having a party crasher. Alex and a couple of guys went out to check, but when they came back, they said the man was gone. Just footprints in the grass leading towards the trees. We locked the back gate and tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Later, I checked my phone and saw a notification. "Unknown device connected to your network." I frowned. That was odd. I dismissed it as a glitch, but things only got worse from there. I tried to focus on conversations, but I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see someone staring back. Every time the bushes swayed in the wind or a branch cracked, I jumped. I felt ridiculous. It was just my nerves, right? Then we all heard it, rustling outside. The group went silent, exchanging uneasy glances. Someone cracked a joke about the party crasher again, but nobody laughed this time. We hesitated, then went outside to check. It was just a raccoon. Relief flooded through us, and we laughed at ourselves for getting so worked up. But I still couldn't relax. Something felt wrong. I walked into the kitchen and noticed the back door was slightly ajar. I could have sworn it was locked. I shut it firmly and turned the lock, my mind racing. Was it left open by someone? Or had it been unlocked on purpose? As the night wound down and people started to leave, I offered to help Alex clean up. We made small talk, but I could tell he was just as on edge as I was. I glanced at the back door again and told him what I'd noticed. He shrugged, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Probably nothing, man," he said. "Just let's call it a night." I left feeling a strange, suffocating sense of dread. I looked back at the house before getting into my car. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The next morning, I woke up to a call from Alex. He was frantic. "Mike, someone was in the house last night." "What?" I sat up, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" "There are muddy footprints inside. They lead from the back door, across the living room, and they stop at every bedroom door." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you sure? Did you see anything else?" "No sign of forced entry. Nothing's missing. Just those damn footprints." I drove over immediately. When I got there, the police were already doing a sweep. The footprints were smudged, almost like someone had deliberately tried to erase parts of them. But they were still clear enough to see. They led from the back door, through the living room, and stopped right in front of each bedroom. Someone had been standing there, watching us sleep. The cops didn't find anything. They suggested that it might have been a prank, or maybe someone forgot to lock the door. But the look on Alex's face told me he knew, just like I did, that this was no prank. They advised Alex to stay somewhere else for a few days, but I could tell they didn't really believe us. As they left, I noticed a small, smudged handprint on the window facing the backyard. It was too small to belong to an adult. I pointed it out to Alex, but neither of us knew what it meant. He packed a bag and left to stay with his girlfriend. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see headlights following me, but the road was empty. Back at my place, I checked my phone and saw a new message from an unknown number. "Nice party. See you soon." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I tried calling Alex, but there was no answer. I haven't heard from him since that day. I'm posting this here because I don't know what else to do. Maybe someone can give me advice or help explain what happened. Maybe I'm just overreacting, but I can't help feeling like it's not over. Just now, as I was about to hit post, there was a soft knock at my front door. I'm standing in the middle of my living room, staring at the door. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely breathe. Should I open it, or should I just... The knocking stops. The neighbor. I moved into my new apartment a few months ago. It's a small, run-down complex. Nothing fancy, but it was a step up from my last place. The walls are thin, and the lights in the hallway flicker sometimes, but I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, and I wasn't looking to make friends. I'd go to work, come back, make dinner, and spend the evenings browsing the internet or watching TV. Just a typical routine. But a few weeks in, I started noticing small things that seemed off. There was this one neighbor in the unit across from mine, a middle-aged woman. I never saw her come or go. The blinds in her window were always shut, and I'd sometimes hear muffled sounds from her apartment. It didn't sound like a TV or a conversation. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on, like a scraping noise or faint shuffling. One night, I came home a little later than usual. As I reached my door, I noticed a faint light coming from under her door. I didn't hear any movement. It struck me as strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe I just hadn't been paying attention before. A few days later, I was watching TV when I heard something odd. It was faint, but it sounded like a cry or a plea for help. I muted the TV, straining to listen, but the noise stopped. I sat there, staring at the wall separating my apartment from hers, heart racing. Maybe I imagined it? The next night, I heard it again, this time louder. It was definitely a cry, but it was muffled, like someone trying to scream through a pillow. I decided to mention it casually to a couple of neighbors when I ran into them in the hallway. Their reactions were strange. One guy, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, just stared at me, eyes wide, then stammered something about that apartment being empty. Another neighbor quickly changed the subject, like I hadn't even said anything. That night, I heard something else, heavy dragging sounds, followed by a loud thud, then silence. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I went straight to the landlord's office. I described what I'd heard, and the landlord, an elderly man who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle, waved me off. "That unit's been empty for 6 months," he said. "There's no one living there." I insisted that I'd heard something, but he just shook his head and went back to his puzzle, muttering that I shouldn't worry about it. I left feeling more confused than ever. Back in my apartment, I decided to keep an eye on things. I spent hours each day peeking through my peephole, watching the hallway. I'd occasionally see a shadow move behind the blinds in the woman's apartment, but every time I tried to catch her coming or going, the hallway was empty. It became an obsession. I recorded the noises I heard, replaying them over and over. I even knocked on her door once, but there was no answer. One night I heard footsteps outside my door. I glanced through the peephole and saw a dark figure standing in front of her apartment, facing my door. It felt like it was watching me. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. until the figure turned and walked away. I was scared, but also angry. Who were they? Why were they messing with me? The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It said, "Stay quiet like a good neighbor, or else." My blood ran cold. Who had left it? How did they know I'd been watching? I tried to go back to my routine, ignoring the sounds, ignoring the note. But the noises got worse. It was no longer just muffled cries. There were loud crashes, thumping noises, and one night, a scream that made my skin crawl. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a flashlight, I walked over to her door. My hands were shaking, but I called out, "Hello? Is everything okay?" No response. I hesitated, then turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and cold. There was no sign of life, no furniture, no lights, just bare walls covered in dust. I moved the flashlight around and felt my stomach drop. Taped to the walls were dozens of handwritten notes. They all said the same things. "I told you to stay quiet." "Good neighbors don't pry." "Last warning." Before I could process what I was seeing, the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. I tried the knob. It was locked. I pounded on the door, shouting for help. There were footsteps outside, then a soft, mocking laughter, followed by a woman's voice humming a lullaby. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, the door creaked open. I ran out, looking both ways down the hallway, but it was empty. My hands were trembling as I locked myself in my apartment. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Who would believe me? For the next few days, I stayed in my apartment as much as I could. I jumped at every sound, every creak of the floorboards, expecting another note or worse. I tried to call the landlord again, but his number was disconnected. I thought about moving out, but I was scared that if I left, it might provoke whoever was doing this. A few days later, I came home to find another note stuck to my door. This one was shorter. It simply said, "Good neighbors know when to keep quiet." I haven't heard the noises since then, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. I don't know what to do. Should I move? Should I call the police? Every time I think about doing something, I remember the last line of that note. Maybe I'll just stay quiet and hope it all goes away. After all, good neighbors don't pry, right? The basement rental. I moved to a new city for college and needed a cheap place to live. Most of the apartments close to campus were way out of my budget, so when I saw an online listing for a basement unit with a super low rent, I jumped on it. It wasn't in the best part of town, but it was only a short bus ride away from campus. Seemed like a good deal. The landlord, an older man named Mr. H, lived upstairs. He seemed nice enough when I first met him, but there were a few rules that stood out as odd. He made me promise that I'd notify him if I ever planned on having guests over. "Just want to make sure I'm aware of who's in my house," he explained, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. The basement was small and a bit damp, but I figured I could handle it. My first few nights there were pretty normal, except for the occasional creaking noise from above my ceiling. I wrote it off as just the house settling or Mr. H moving around. One morning, though, I noticed something strange. The door to a small storage closet in my room, one I never used, was slightly open. I knew I'd closed it. It made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. Maybe I'd just been careless. Then, a few nights later, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps right above me. It was past midnight, and they moved slowly, like someone pacing. I stayed in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to rationalize it. Maybe Mr. H couldn't sleep. But when I asked him the next day, he told me with a friendly grin that he'd been out of town the past few nights. My stomach churned, but I laughed it off, pretending I wasn't rattled. Maybe I'd heard something else. After that, I started noticing more odd things. A cup I'd left on the table was slightly off its spot. Books were not where I remembered leaving them. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. But then, one evening, as I lay in bed, I felt a cool draft, even though my windows were sealed. And then I heard it, faint scraping sounds coming from beneath the floorboards. I got out of bed and checked the floor carefully. Near the foot of my bed, there was a barely visible seam. I ran my fingers along it and my heart dropped. It was a small, square outline, a trapdoor. Fear took hold of me. I started locking my bedroom door at night. I set up small traps. A broom leaned against the door, a piece of tape across the door frame. A couple of times, I found the broom knocked over. My mind raced with scenarios. Was Mr. H sneaking in? Or was it someone else? I confronted Mr. H about it one morning. He just chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's just us here, son." "You sure you're not imagining things?" His tone was light, but something about his eyes made me shiver. I didn't press further. Desperate for answers, I decided to set up a hidden camera in my room. I tucked it under a pile of clothes in the corner, making sure it had a clear view of the space under my bed and the area near the trapdoor. I went out for the day, trying to stay calm. When I got back that night, I reviewed the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Just me leaving, the empty room. I fast-forwarded until something caught my eye. A faint shadow moving near the bed. My stomach tightened as I watched legs, someone's legs, emerging from the trapdoor. The figure stood still for a moment, then stepped out fully. It was Mr. H. He was in my room, standing over my bed, staring down at where I slept. He stayed there for minutes, watching before crouching back down and disappearing into the trapdoor. I watched the footage again and again, my hands trembling. It was real. There was no way out of the basement except through Mr. H's house or through that trapdoor. I couldn't stay. I had to leave. I packed my things as quietly as I could, stuffing clothes into my backpack. Every creak, every gust of wind made me jump. Was he up there, listening? Or was he under me? I lifted the rug and stared at the trapdoor. My hands shook as I gripped its edges, trying to force it open. It wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, a soft click and a faint shuffling sound from underneath. Someone was trying to open it from the other side. I backed away, heart pounding, and grabbed my bag. I ran to the door, flinging it open and sprinting up the stairs, bursting out into the cold night air. I didn't look back until I reached the end of the driveway. As I turned, I saw the trapdoor in my room, through the basement window. It was open now and a face peered out, dirty, gaunt, eyes shining in the darkness. It wasn't Mr. H. I spent the night at a cheap hotel, too scared to go back. When I reviewed the footage again, I noticed something horrifying. The man who came out of the trapdoor wasn't Mr. H. He was dressed in filthy clothes, his hair matted. He looked like he'd been living there for weeks. And then I remembered. The scraping sounds I heard from under the floorboards. Mr. H knew about it. He even asked if I was all right that night. He wasn't just aware, he was involved. The next morning, I left town without a word. I didn't go to the police. I didn't confront Mr. H. What would I even say? I just drove until I couldn't drive anymore. I never told anyone, not until now. I couldn't prove what happened, and honestly, I didn't want to know what was going on under that trapdoor. I still wake up some nights, sweating, convinced someone's watching me. I recently checked the online listings again out of curiosity. The basement apartment is up for rent again. The description mentions peaceful surroundings and a high level of privacy. If you see a cheap basement rental near that area, don't go for it, no matter how nice the landlord seems. Something really strange happened on our midnight hike last weekend, and I can't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My partner Sam and I love hiking, and last weekend we decided to go for a late night hike on a trail known for being secluded. We thought it would be perfect for stargazing. We're both pretty experienced, so the idea of being out in the woods at night didn't bother us. But now, looking back, I wish we had never gone. It started out like any other hike. The forest was unusually quiet, though. No rustling leaves or chirping insects, just silence. It felt heavy. I tried to brush it off as nerves or maybe the cold air playing tricks on my mind. Sam was talking about some constellation they wanted to see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we started down the trail, I noticed an old car parked at the entrance. Its engine was running, headlights on, but no one was inside. It was odd, but we were focused on getting to the clearing, so we didn't think much of it at the time. We moved on, telling ourselves it was probably someone taking a quick break. About 15 minutes in, we noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. It looked like a flashlight, turning on and off in the distance. We paused, thinking maybe someone else had decided to hike at the same time, but the way the light moved felt wrong. It wasn't steady, like someone was swinging it around aimlessly. "Who would be out here this late?" Sam asked, voice low. I had no answer. We decided to keep going but stayed alert, moving slower now. That's when we heard a rustling sound up ahead, followed by a figure stepping out from behind a tree. A man, disheveled and dirty, stood in front of us. His clothes were torn, and his face was partially hidden under a mess of hair. He stared at us for a few seconds before speaking. "Turn back," he said in a raspy voice. "They're looking for you." We exchanged confused glances. Was he dangerous or just lost? He seemed agitated, his eyes darting around like he expected someone or something to jump out at any second. It was clear he didn't want to be there, but we didn't know what to make of his warning. "Who's looking for us?" I asked. But he just shook his head, stepping back into the shadows without another word. We decided to leave, but as we turned around, the path behind us seemed different. The trail twisted in ways I didn't remember, and the trees looked closer together. Panic started creeping in. We tried retracing our steps, but nothing looked familiar. Then we heard it. The voices. Faint, distorted, like they were coming from all directions. My name. Sam's name. It was like the woods were whispering. I grabbed Sam's hand, and we started moving faster. "We have to hide," Sam whispered, pulling me towards a thick cluster of bushes. We crouched down, staying as still as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever or whatever was out there would hear it. Flashlights appeared in the distance, sweeping through the woods. The beams flickered erratically, like they were searching for something or someone. The voices grew louder, closer. We held our breath. "We'll find them soon. They can't have gone far," one of the voices said, calm and measured. I froze. It was my voice. Someone was out there, using my voice, repeating my words as if mocking me. Sam tensed beside me, ready to run, but I shook my head, terrified that any movement would give us away. After what felt like hours, the lights and voices began to fade. We stayed hidden, too scared to move, until the silence returned. When we finally crawled out of our hiding spot, we found a small piece of paper pinned to a tree with a knife. It read, "We almost had you." Beneath the note, the bark of the tree was scratched deeply, our names, both mine and Sam's, etched into the wood. I felt my stomach drop. How did they know our names? We needed to get out. Forgetting the trail, we pushed through the dense underbrush, branches clawing at our clothes. We stumbled across the old car from before, headlights still on, the engine still running, no one inside. It was pointed down a narrow path, deeper into the woods. "Maybe it's a way out," Sam suggested. Desperation made me agree. As we approached, voices erupted again, closer this time. We ducked behind the car, holding our breath as flashlights swept over the area we'd just left. One of the figures turned, the light catching their face. It was the man from earlier. He stood there grinning like he'd won some twisted game. "Go!" I hissed, pulling Sam. We broke into a run, the lights chasing us. The voices were shouting now, more frantic. But we didn't stop. We ran for what felt like miles, branches snapping underfoot, until the trees finally thinned. We burst out onto the road, and there was our car. We sprinted to it, fumbling with the keys, half expecting to be grabbed from behind. When we finally slammed the door shut, I felt a brief moment of relief. But then, Sam's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "We almost had you. Until next time." We drove in silence. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but no headlights followed. Sam suggested going to the police, but what could we say? Voices in the woods and a creepy message? It would be dismissed as a prank. A few days later, we returned home from grocery shopping to find fresh scratches along the side of our car. The same message from the woods. "We almost had you." There's no sign of who did it, no cameras, caught anything. I don't know who they are or why they were looking for us that night, but they know where we live. So, if you ever go for a midnight hike and someone tells you to turn back, listen. You never know who might be out there, looking for you. The Ride Home, a real-life horror story. Posted by You Throwaway Confessions, 2. I've debated posting this for a while, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened a few months ago, and I still feel uneasy whenever I think about it. It might sound dramatic, but it was easily one of the scariest moments of my life. I'd been out with a few friends, just the usual bar night, laughing, drinking, blowing off steam after a rough week. It was past midnight when we all decided to call it a night. We said our goodbyes, and I opened my rideshare app. It was late, I was tipsy, and the thought of taking an Uber or Lyft felt safer than walking or driving. As I stood on the corner, I noticed how deserted the street was. The laughter from the bar was muffled behind closed doors, and the cold night air seemed to carry an eerie silence. I shivered a little and pulled my coat tighter. The app was acting weird, glitching a bit, but I brushed it off as a bad signal. There was a shadowy figure on the other side of the road, but when I looked again, they were gone. I felt that small, creeping unease you get when you think someone's watching you. I ignored it, focusing back on my phone. After what felt like forever, my ride finally appeared. A gray sedan with a generic name, John. I squinted at the profile picture. Something was off, but I couldn't quite figure out what. Maybe it was the low light or my tiredness. I told myself I was just being paranoid and stepped into the car when it pulled up. "Hi, my name, right?" the driver said with a smile that felt just a little too wide. I hesitated. He didn't ask me to confirm his name first like they usually do. "Yes, that's me," I replied, sliding into the back seat. He seemed friendly enough, asking how my night went, if I'd had fun with my friends. I mumbled a response, already looking at my phone, watching the little map as we started moving. Something wasn't right. He wasn't taking the usual route. Isn't it quicker to go straight and take the main road?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "There's some road work ahead," he said casually. "I know a shortcut." His voice was smooth, but something about his tone felt wrong. I forced a smile and nodded, telling myself to relax. I started texting a friend, pretending like I just wanted to chat, but really, I wanted them to know where I was, just in case. He kept talking, asking more personal questions. "Where do you work? Do you live alone?" I answered vaguely, trying to steer the conversation back to safer topics. But the more I dodged, the harder his eyes seemed to get in the rearview mirror. I decided to call my friend instead. No answer. I tried again. Still no answer. That's when I noticed my signal was gone, even though we were still in the city. The driver glanced back at me and smiled. "These dead zones are weird, huh?" he said, his voice a little too cheerful. The city lights blurred and faded as we moved farther away. My heart was pounding now. I kept scanning outside, trying to memorize street names or landmarks. There were fewer buildings and more trees now. My stomach twisted as I realized we were heading into a more isolated area. "I'd really prefer if we stayed on the main roads," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned up the radio, drowning out my voice. The air in the car felt heavier. There was a strange smell, metallic and sharp. My thoughts started spiraling. Was it blood? No, I told myself. It's just my imagination. I'm just overreacting. Then, without warning, he swerved onto a dirt road and stopped. "I need to check the tires," he muttered, getting out of the car. The engine was still running. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but I felt frozen. He stepped out and headed toward the trunk. I heard a metallic clanging sound, like something heavy being moved. That's when I saw it. The driver's door was still open. Summoning every ounce of courage, I unlocked my door and bolted out. The cold air hit my lungs like a punch, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly into the woods, branches scratching at my skin, tears blurring my vision. Behind me, I heard him shouting, cursing. He was getting closer. My legs felt like they were on fire, but I kept running. His voice was closer now, filled with rage. "You didn't have to make this so difficult," he yelled. My breath was coming in ragged gasps as I stumbled upon an old, abandoned shed. I squeezed inside, my body trembling as I forced myself into the smallest, darkest corner. I tried to control my breathing, but each inhale felt like it echoed. I heard his footsteps. He stopped right outside the shed, muttering to himself. The silence was suffocating. My body ached from tension. I could hear him breathing, the sound harsh and uneven. He kicked the door, and I flinched, biting my lip to keep from making any noise. But he didn't come in. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, his footsteps faded. The silence stretched on, and I waited, too scared to move. Was he gone? Or was he waiting for me to come out? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly stepped outside, every muscle in my body tensed. That's when I saw it. Headlights approaching from the distance. My heart sank. Was it him again? A car stopped a few feet away, and a woman's voice called out, asking if I needed help. I nearly collapsed with relief, but a part of me hesitated. Could I trust her? The woman seemed genuine, showing me her ID and letting me use her phone to call the police. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as I explained what happened. The police arrived, and I was taken to the station to give my statement. They listened, but something felt off. The officers exchanged looks when I described the driver. They told me no cars had been reported in the area, and when they checked my rideshare app, it showed no record of the ride. It was like the driver and his car never existed. Before I left, I overheard one detective murmuring, "We've had a few cases like this. They never end well." I've tried to move on, but I can't. I avoid rideshares now. I feel a surge of panic whenever I see a gray sedan. One day, I checked my rideshare app again out of curiosity. The ride was marked as canceled, but only 30 minutes after I'd been in the car. I tried reporting it to the company, but they found nothing. It's like he never existed. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but if you ever feel like something's off about your driver, trust your instincts and get out. I don't think I would have made it home otherwise. The Forgotten Friend. It's been a few months since this happened, and I still can't shake the feeling that something's horribly wrong. I've tried telling myself it's all in my head, that maybe I'm just imagining things, but I know deep down that what we experienced at that cabin wasn't normal. I've kept quiet until now, but I think I need to share this. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar. So, a bit of background. I'm Alex, and I've known my group of friends for almost a decade. We met back in college and stayed close even after life pulled us in different directions. Last fall, we decided to take a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be a chance to reconnect. Just me, Chris, Jake, Matt, and Brian. We hadn't all been together in over a year, so it felt good to finally have everyone in one place. Or at least, it should have. Right from the start, something felt off. Brian was quiet during the drive up. He just stared out the window, not saying much, which wasn't like him. Chris even joked, "Dude, you look like a whole different person. I almost didn't recognize you." We all laughed it off, but I remember thinking Chris wasn't entirely kidding. It didn't help that when we arrived, Brian asked me, "Do you still hate swimming?" I paused for a second because I've never been afraid of water. I shrugged it off, assuming he'd just misspoken or confused me with someone else. But it stuck with me. Little did I know it was just the beginning. That first night, everything was fine. Mostly. We grilled, drank a bit, and caught up on what we'd missed in each other's lives. But then Brian started bringing up things that none of us remembered. He mentioned a road trip he and Matt had supposedly taken a few years back, recalling vivid details like the diner they stopped at and the songs they sang along to. Matt laughed awkwardly, saying, "Dude, I've never been on a road trip with you." Brian just stared at him, looking confused, before shaking his head and muttering, "Maybe I'm mixing things up." We all felt that tension, but no one said anything. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I overheard Brian whispering to himself outside. He was repeating our names and weird details about us. I opened the door and asked him what he was doing. He just smiled and said, "I like remembering our good times, but you keep forgetting, don't you?" The next morning, Brian disappeared for a few hours. When he finally came back, he had scratches on his hands. When we asked where he'd been, he brushed it off, saying, "Just needed some air." That night, he brought up a trip to a lake house we'd supposedly taken together. None of us remembered it, and when we tried to convince him that it never happened, he got defensive, saying, "How could you forget? It was one of the best weekends of my life." It was unsettling, to say the least. That's when I pulled Chris aside. "Does Brian seem different to you?" I asked. Chris nodded slowly. "Yeah, man, I thought it was just me. But something's not right." We decided to check Brian's things while he was gone again. What we found sent chills down my spine. There was no wallet, no ID, no phone. Just basic clothes and toiletries. Inside a notebook, we saw our names written repeatedly, along with phrases like Matt likes steak, Chris afraid of dogs, Alex still hates swimming. I felt my stomach drop. Who the hell was this guy? When he came back, we confronted him. "If you don't want me here, I'll leave," he said calmly. He didn't seem upset, just indifferent. We watched as he walked out the door and disappeared into the woods. We expected him to come back, but he didn't. Hours passed. I started going through old pictures on my phone, trying to figure out when Brian had started acting strange. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't in most of the photos, even the ones he should have been in. In the few where he did appear, he was in the background, almost like he'd been tagging along, not really part of the group. I turned to Chris. "When did Brian join us?" I asked. Chris looked at me blankly. "He's always been around, right?" My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Why do you keep forgetting our times together, Alex?" I showed the others, and that's when we realized none of us had any cell reception. The cabin's landline was dead too. Panic set in. We heard the front door creak open, but when we checked, no one was there. Just outside, we found another notebook, identical to the one we'd seen before, but this one had newer entries. Day 1. They don't remember the lake house. Day 2. They still think I'm Brian. Flipping through the pages, we saw detailed descriptions of everything we'd done since arriving. The final entry read, "Time to leave before they remember." We ran to our cars, but the keys were missing. We heard footsteps outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I felt a presence behind me and spun around. For a split second, I saw someone's silhouette, someone familiar but not quite right. Then they vanished into the woods. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, waiting for morning. No one spoke. Every creak of the cabin made us jump. As soon as the sun rose, we packed up and left, not saying a word about what happened. I tried calling Brian later, but his number was disconnected. It's like he never existed. A week later, I got another text. "Don't worry, I'll see you again soon." I haven't heard from him since. I even tried tracking him down. No social media, no old contacts. It's like he was never really part of our group. Sometimes I wonder if we ever had a friend named Brian at all, or if someone just pretended to be him for all those years. Sometimes I get calls in the middle of the night. I never answer them, but they always leave a message. "Remember me?" The window cleaner. I've lived in this high-rise apartment for about 6 months. It's a pretty standard place, modern amenities, great view of the city skyline, and above all, security. That's the reason I picked it. I live alone, and the thought of being on the 15th floor with a doorman and security cameras made me feel safe. Or at least it did. The first time I noticed the window cleaner, I didn't think much of it. He was just outside cleaning the large living room window. He didn't wave or acknowledge me, just kept scrubbing away. I thought it was a little odd that he didn't try to make any friendly gestures like most workers would, but I figured he was just focused on his job. The thing is, he started showing up more often. The cleaning was only supposed to happen every couple of months, according to the building's schedule, but I started seeing him outside every other week, sometimes even more frequently. Each time, he spent longer outside my window, slowly dragging his squeegee down the glass. He'd finish one section, then stand there for a moment, staring inside before moving on to the next spot. I brushed it off at first. Maybe I'd missed an announcement about increased cleaning schedules. Maybe I was just imagining it. But one day, I saw him outside again and decided to call the building management to ask. That's when I found out no cleaning had been scheduled for that day, or for any of the other days I'd seen him recently. I hung up the phone, feeling a little unsettled but not yet scared. I decided to just keep an eye out. The next time I saw him, I tried to look a little closer. He was still wearing the same uniform, but this time I noticed something that made my stomach drop. He was holding his phone up, angling it inside my apartment. It looked like he was taking photos. I panicked and stepped back, heart racing. He didn't notice. He just kept moving his phone around as if he were cataloging my entire living room. I grabbed my phone and called the building management again, frantically explaining what I'd seen. They said they'd check the cameras and call me back. When they did, their answer left me speechless. They told me there was no record of any window cleaning happening that day. No cleaner had been scheduled, and worse, there was no footage of anyone entering or leaving through the service elevator that the cleaners usually use. It was like he had never been there. That's when the real fear set in. I stopped opening my blinds. I started staying away from the windows altogether, avoiding the feeling of being exposed. But even with the blinds closed, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me. It felt like I was being watched constantly. Every creak and shadow made my heart race. Then, little things started to go missing. My keys disappeared for a whole day, only to show up in the exact spot I always leave them. Picture frames were shifted slightly. Books I hadn't touched in weeks were out of place. It was driving me crazy. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, that I'd started imagining things because I was so on edge. I decided to get some extra security, deadbolts on the windows and doors, and a small security camera for my living room. It wasn't much, but it gave me some peace of mind. At least I thought it did. A few nights later, I reviewed the footage. My stomach churned as I watched the playback. There he was again, the window cleaner. But it was the middle of the night. He wasn't cleaning this time. He was standing outside my living room window, face pressed against the glass, staring inside. I could see his breath fogging up the glass as he stood there motionless. He stayed like that for nearly 10 minutes before turning away and disappearing into the darkness. I showed the footage to the building security, but they brushed it off. They said it was probably a trick of the light or maybe a camera glitch. They suggested I might be overreacting. Overreacting. I could barely sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face staring in at me. I couldn't live like this anymore, so I took a day off work. I sat in my living room with the lights off, just waiting. I was determined to catch him this time, to confront him and make him stop. It was almost midnight when I saw him again. He appeared out of nowhere, hovering outside my window with that same blank expression. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to move. I ran to the window and banged on it, screaming at him, demanding to know who he was and what he wanted. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, a small, unsettling smile, then turned and vanished into the night. I bolted out of my apartment, running down the stairwell and out into the street. But by the time I reached the ground floor, he was gone. Nowhere in sight. It was as if he had just disappeared. When I got back to my apartment, my front door was slightly open. I pushed it open, dreading what I'd find. There, lying on my coffee table, was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, sound asleep, taken from inside my own living room. I took the photo to the police. They dismissed it as a prank, said there wasn't enough evidence to take it seriously. I felt utterly alone. My home, the one place that should have been safe, felt like a prison. I packed up and moved out a week later. But even in my new apartment miles away, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye or see a figure lingering too long near a window, I freeze. Yesterday, I got a package in the mail, no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was another photograph, this time of me sleeping, taken just last night in my new bedroom. No matter where I go, he's still watching. The wrong profile. I'm not usually the type to post on Reddit, but I feel like I have to get this off my chest. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid what happened to me. It all started about 6 months ago when I decided to try online dating again. I was tired of being alone. My life was so routine. Wake up, work remotely, watch Netflix, go to sleep. I thought meeting someone new might break the monotony. I downloaded the app, swiped left 100 times, and then I met Dan. He seemed different, genuine, funny, and attentive. We chatted for a few weeks before I agreed to meet him for coffee. He wasn't like the others I'd met through the app. He asked about my favorite books, listened when I talked about my job, and seemed truly interested in getting to know me. Maybe that's why I brushed off the odd feeling I got when he mentioned a scar I have on my wrist, a scar I never mentioned to him. I assumed I must have brought it up in our texts and just forgot. The date went well, or so I thought. We said goodbye, and I told myself I'd see him again. 3 days later, I got a message from a new profile on the app. "Did you enjoy your coffee?" it read. I laughed it off as a weird coincidence. But then, over the next few days, more messages came. They were from different profiles, each more unsettling than the last. "Love the way you played with your hair when you laughed," one said. Another read, "You look stunning in that blue sweater." I froze. I hadn't posted any pictures of myself in that sweater. And how did they know I fidget with my hair? It felt like someone had been watching us during the date. My first thought was to ask Dan. Maybe he had some creepy friends or shared details of our date online. When I confronted him, he seemed as confused as I was. He suggested I report it to the app and then blocked me. His profile disappeared. I realized then I didn't really know him. No last name, no social media, just a phone number that now went straight to voicemail. I felt sick. But I deleted the app, thinking that would stop it. It didn't. The messages started coming to my phone and email. "How was your grocery run?" one said, attached to a photo of me in the parking lot of the store near my old apartment. Another had a picture of me through my living room window. My heart pounded as I looked around my apartment, the blinds suddenly feeling like a thin veil of false privacy. I changed my phone number and email, thinking that would cut the connection. But then, a new anonymous number texted me. "You look beautiful in blue." I hadn't worn that sweater since the date. I went to the police, hoping they'd take it seriously. But without direct threats or physical harm, they said there wasn't much they could do. "Probably someone trying to scare you," the officer said dismissively. "Just ignore it." Ignore it? How could I ignore the feeling of being watched every second? I decided to move. I broke my lease, packed up my life, and found a new place on the other side of town. I told no one where I was going. I was paranoid by then, jumping at every shadow, every creak in my old apartment. I thought the nightmare was finally over when I settled into my new place. Then, one morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "I found you again." My hands shook as I read it. I installed security cameras the same day and started carrying pepper spray wherever I went. I barely left the apartment, afraid of who might be out there, watching. The messages became more personal, referencing things I hadn't unpacked yet. "You should hang that painting in the living room," one said. I hadn't even taken it out of the box. Whoever it was had been inside my apartment. I set a trap. One night, I pretended to leave but hid in the closet with my phone. I watched the camera feed on my screen, heart racing. A few hours later, the door opened softly. A man walked in, his face hidden under a hoodie. He moved around my living room, touching my things, muttering to himself. He went into the bedroom. I covered my mouth to muffle my breathing. I could barely see through the slats of the closet door as he stood just inches away. He turned, his head cocked like he was listening. And then he whispered, "I knew you'd come back here." I couldn't move, couldn't think. He stood there for what felt like an eternity before leaving. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They found signs that someone had been staying in my apartment, food wrappers, a sleeping bag hidden under the bed, some of my missing things. I was shaken. The police promised to keep an eye on the place, but there wasn't much more they could do. I moved out that night, went to stay with a friend. I couldn't be alone. Every noise felt like him coming back. Every shadow was a reminder that he could be watching. Before I left my apartment for the last time, I saw it. A message scratched into the paint behind my bathroom mirror. "See you soon." I don't know what he wants or why he's doing this. All I know is that he's still out there. I haven't used a dating app since, and I don't think I ever will again. I've changed my number again, and I'm staying somewhere safe, but I still look over my shoulder every day. So, if you're reading this, please be careful with what you share online. You never know who's watching. And if something doesn't feel right, even if it seems small, don't ignore it. I still don't know if I'm really alone. The hospital shift. I've been a night shift nurse at a small local hospital for the past 2 years. I chose the night shift because it's usually quieter. I like the stillness and the way everything feels slower, almost peaceful. The hospital is small, and most of the patients are elderly folks recovering from surgeries or dealing with chronic conditions. It's never been a place where anything exciting or terrifying happens. Over time, you get used to the little oddities: lights flickering, the occasional sound of a door creaking open, or even faint voices when no one else is around. Most of these can be easily explained: faulty wiring, the wind, or tired staff letting their imaginations run wild. But there was one night that changed everything for me, and I still can't quite shake it off. It started like any other shift. I settled into my usual routine, checking on the patients, making notes, and walking through the dimly lit corridors. It was just past midnight when I noticed something strange. The light in room 304 kept turning on and off. Room 304 was assigned to Mr. Davies, an older gentleman who was mostly nonverbal and spent most of his time staring blankly at the wall. I assumed it was a problem with the bulb or the switch. I went in to check, and sure enough, Mr. Davies was lying there, sound asleep. I turned the light off, walked back to the nurse's station, and continued with my notes. A few minutes later, I glanced down the hall, and there it was again, the light in 304 shining brightly. I sighed, feeling a little annoyed. I went back to the room, turned it off again, and this time stood there for a moment. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, as I stepped out and closed the door, the light flickered on. Again. I went back in. Mr. Davies hadn't moved an inch. I flicked the switch a few times. It seemed fine now, so I left. But as soon as I reached the station, I looked over my shoulder and the light was on again. My stomach tightened. I felt a sudden urge to call out to someone, but I remembered I was alone in this ward. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a short circuit, or maybe Mr. Davies somehow managed to move without me noticing. After a couple more trips back and forth, I decided to ignore it. I sat back at my desk, feeling uneasy. That's when I noticed something new, a sticky note on my monitor that read, "You're not alone, nurse." My first reaction was panic. I looked around the empty hallway, heart pounding. I tried to think logically. Maybe I left it there earlier? But I couldn't remember doing that. Maybe a coworker left it? But I was the only one scheduled for this ward tonight. I told myself it was just a prank, someone's idea of a joke. I forced myself to finish my rounds, but each step felt heavier. The hospital seemed darker than usual, and every noise seemed louder. When I reached Mr. Davies' room, the light was off for the first time since I'd noticed the issue. A chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was colder than it should have been, but everything seemed normal. I stepped out, and as I was turning back to the station, I heard it, a faint shuffling sound. It seemed to be coming from Mr. Davies' room. I turned back, but he was still asleep. Then I saw it, a shadow, just outside the door, slipping around the corner. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was there. I ran to the end of the corridor, but it was empty. Trying to stay calm, I picked up the phone to call the security desk, but the line crackled and cut out. I was alone. I could feel my pulse racing, my throat dry. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I decided to do a sweep of the ward. Each empty room I passed felt like it was closing in on me. When I returned to Mr. Davies' room, I noticed something different. His bed was empty and the window was slightly open. A cold breeze blew in. I called out his name softly, but there was no answer. I felt panic rising in my chest. I turned around and nearly screamed when my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. "I see you." I looked around frantically, but there was no one. I glanced out the window and saw it. A car idling in the distance. Its headlights flashed once, then it sped away. My hands were trembling. I knew I should call someone, but who? What could I even say? I somehow managed to finish my shift. At dawn, I reported everything to my supervisor. She dismissed it all, saying I was probably tired, that maybe Mr. Davies had been moved earlier and no one told me. She said the note was likely from another nurse who forgot about it. I tried to believe her. I was relieved to leave, but the whole way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the car following me. My street was empty when I got there, and I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I found it. A note folded neatly and tucked into my mailbox. "See you again, nurse." The handwriting was identical to the one on the sticky note. My heart sank. I felt nauseous. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I just stood there, frozen. It's been weeks since that night. I transferred to a different hospital. But sometimes, when I leave after a long shift, I still see that same car parked across the street. I tell myself it's a coincidence, that I'm being irrational, but the fear is always there, lingering. If anyone else has had a similar experience, I'd love to hear from you. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or if I'm really not alone. The Local Legend, a Reddit horror story. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or local legends. As a journalist, I thrive on uncovering the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. But this time, I may have gone too far. My name is Tom, and I'm in my late 20s. I've been freelancing for a few years now, constantly searching for a story that would give me a break in this competitive field. A few months ago, I stumbled upon a small town called Hollow Creek while on an unrelated assignment. It seemed like any other quiet, rural town at first. Too quiet, actually. The streets were mostly empty, and the people I passed by on my way to the local diner stared just a little too long. It felt like they were silently asking me to leave. I ignored it, chalking it up to the typical suspicion outsiders usually face in small towns. But then I noticed something odd, a strange symbol painted on the side of an abandoned building. It looked like a crude spiral, but with jagged edges. I dismissed it as random graffiti. That was until I overheard a conversation between two men in the diner. I was paying my bill when I caught a snippet of what they were saying. And they still haven't found his body yet. The way they stopped talking and looked at me when I glanced their way sent a shiver down my spine. Naturally, my curiosity was piqued. I started asking around about disappearances in Hollow Creek. Every time I brought it up, people would give me the same cold stare and either change the subject or outright ignore me. Finally, an older woman at the grocery store mentioned an old hiking trail called Raven's Peak. "People go missing there," she whispered, her face pale. "The trail's been closed for 10 years, but some still try to hike it. They never come back." She refused to say more, but others hinted at accidents and wild animals. One man muttered something about the trail being cursed before walking away quickly. I knew then that I had to check it out for myself. Despite the warnings, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something much darker than just a dangerous hiking path. That evening, as I left the local library, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned around and saw a man in a hooded jacket standing at the far end of the street, staring directly at me. I blinked, and he was gone. Trying to brush off the encounter, I headed back to my hotel. When I got there, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single note. "Stay away from the trail or you'll end up like the others." I should have left. Any sane person would have packed up and forgotten about the whole thing. But I couldn't. I woke up the next morning determined to find out what was going on. I set off for the trail early, carrying only the essentials: a bottle of water, my camera, and a notebook. The entrance to Raven's Peak was overgrown, The warning signs faded and barely visible. I squeezed through a gap in the fence and began the hike. At first, everything seemed normal, but as I ventured deeper, the air turned heavy and the forest grew unnervingly quiet. No birds, no insects, just silence. As I walked, I noticed symbols carved into the trees. They were similar to the one I'd seen on the building, but more intricate. Someone had gone through the effort of maintaining these carvings for years. I felt a growing sense of unease, but I pushed on. About an hour into the hike, I came across an abandoned campsite. Torn clothing, scattered personal items, and a half-buried backpack lay strewn around. A child's small shoe caught my eye, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it had been left behind by campers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened here. Then I heard it, a faint voice calling my name from deeper in the woods. I froze. There was no way anyone knew I was out here. My heart pounded as I turned around, searching for the source of the voice. "Tom!" it called again, closer this time. I grabbed my camera, snapping photos in every direction, but I saw nothing. Panic set in. I turned to leave, only to hear footsteps behind me, rapid and heavy. I spun around, expecting to see someone or something, but there was no one. Only fresh footprints, leading right up to where I stood. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I found myself drawn further down the trail. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was a large stone slab covered in what looked like dried blood. Rusted tools and jagged stones lay scattered around. The sight of it made my stomach lurch. Then they emerged, half a dozen locals, all wearing hooded jackets. Their faces were blank, eyes dark and empty. One of them stepped forward. "You were warned," he said flatly. "Leave and never come back." I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but fear gripped my throat. I turned and ran, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps echoing through the woods. When I finally broke through the tree line and stumbled to my car, I didn't look back. I drove out of Hollow Creek that same night. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I thought I'd escaped, but a week later, I received a plain envelope at my office. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence. "Remember what we said." Since then, I've been haunted by nightmares. Shadows flit at the edges of my vision, and I see hooded figures in my dreams, watching, waiting. I'm sharing this as a warning. If you ever find yourself near Hollow Creek, stay away from Raven's Peak. Some places are better left alone, and some truths are too dangerous to uncover. Because once you start digging, you might not like what you find. The Babysitter's Nightmare. Hey everyone, I'm not sure why I'm posting this, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been a few months, but I still can't shake the feeling of what happened that night. It all started when I was babysitting for the Muellers, a family I'd known for years. I'm a 16-year-old high school student, and I sometimes babysit to make a bit of extra cash. The Muellers are great, a nice couple with 2 kids, Jack, 8, and Lily, 5. I've babysat for them many times, so I'm comfortable in their home. It's a big, 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Most nights are uneventful. I get the kids to bed, watch some TV, and then wait for the parents to get back. This particular evening felt no different. The kids went to sleep at 8 p.m., and I made myself some tea before settling down in the living room. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. I didn't think much of it. Old houses make noises, right? But then, I heard something that made me pause. It was a faint creak from upstairs. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the house settling. I turned up the volume on the TV, trying to drown out the uneasy feeling creeping in. Looking back, I wish I'd taken it more seriously. I was scrolling through my phone when I got a text. It was from an unknown number, and it read, "I'm in the house." I remember staring at the screen, my mind racing. I thought it was a prank. My friends knew I was babysitting that night, so I replied, "Very funny. Who is this?" But there was no reply. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I felt a twinge of anxiety but told myself not to panic. I checked the locks on the front and back doors. They were secure. I looked out the windows but didn't see anything unusual. Just as I was beginning to calm down, I heard something that made my heart stop. Soft, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I didn't want to wake the kids, so I tiptoed to the bottom of the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. I shined the light up, but everything looked normal. I hesitated, listening to the silence, but then I decided to go up and check on the kids. When I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed something strange. The doors to both Jack's and Lily's rooms were closed. I always left them slightly open so I could hear if they needed anything. My throat tightened, and my hand started to tremble as I stepped toward Jack's door. I tried turning the knob, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. My heart sank. I whispered his name. "Jack? Jack, are you awake?" No response. I rushed over to Lily's room. Same thing, locked from the inside. Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. I backed away, grabbing my phone and calling Mrs. Muller. She picked up on the second ring and I stammered out everything. About the text, the locked doors, the footsteps. Mrs. Muller stayed calm, but I could hear the tension in her voice. She told me to get the spare key from the kitchen drawer, unlock the doors, and get the kids out of the house immediately. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I sprinted downstairs to the kitchen, grabbed the spare key, and froze. There was a loud thud from upstairs. It was followed by a slow creaking sound. I clenched the key in my fist, heart racing, and forced myself back up the stairs. Jack's door was now slightly ajar. I held my breath and whispered his name. "Jack?" He responded in a tiny, scared voice. "Rachel." I heard someone talking in my room, but I couldn't see them. My blood turned to ice. I pushed open the door, grabbed Jack, and whispered for him to stay quiet. We went to Lily's room, unlocked the door, and I scooped her up, still asleep. I told Jack to stay close as we hurried down the stairs. As we reached the bottom, the front door swung open. I nearly screamed, clutching the kids to me. A dark figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the porch light. But then the figure stepped forward. It was a police officer. Mrs. Muller had called them before she called me. They escorted us outside, and I huddled with the kids on the front lawn, watching the officers sweep through the house. After what felt like an eternity, one of them came out and told me they hadn't found anyone inside. I insisted I heard footsteps, that the doors had been locked. One officer looked at me sympathetically but said there were no signs of forced entry. They suggested I stay in the squad car while they checked one more time. It wasn't until I was sitting there that I realized I'd left my phone on the couch. I asked if I could go back in to get it, but they told me to wait until they finished. The Mullers arrived soon after, thanking me over and over, but I could barely register what they were saying. When the officers finally allowed us back in, I rushed to grab my phone. There was a new message notification. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was a photo. A photo of me standing outside Jack's room. The timestamp showed it was taken when I was trying to unlock the doors. The angle was from behind, as if someone had been watching me from the doorway of the master bedroom. I showed the photo to Mrs. Muller. She turned pale and whispered that she'd felt like someone had been in their room before they left. The police took my phone as evidence, but they didn't have much to go on. I left the Mullers that night and didn't sleep at all. I haven't babysat since. I've changed my phone number twice, but I still get random texts from unknown numbers, blank messages, or a single period. I avoid walking past the Muller's house even though it's on my route to school. I don't know if they'll ever find who it was or if they were even after me, but I still feel like I'm being watched. The Sleepwalker. Hey everyone, I'm not really sure why I'm writing this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar and can help me make sense of it. I'm a software engineer in my late 30s, living alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I've been here for about 5 years. It's a nice place, nothing fancy, but it's always felt safe and predictable. Lately, though, things haven't been the same. I've been waking up every morning feeling completely drained, like I didn't sleep at all. I used to sleep deeply, never woke up until my alarm went off, but now, I don't know. I've also noticed small things around the house, my keys turning up in odd places, doors I'm sure I locked being unlocked. I brushed it off as being absent-minded, maybe just getting older. But then, one morning, I found something I couldn't explain. There were muddy footprints on the floor. They led from the front door to my bedroom and back again. It was weird, but I thought maybe I left the door open accidentally and a stray animal got in. I cleaned it up and didn't think much more of it. But then it happened again and again. Every morning for the next few days, I woke up to find the same footprints. They were always the same size as mine, coming and going in the same pattern. It didn't make any sense. I started checking my shoes before going to bed, clean and dry. I scrubbed the floor each night before sleeping, but the footprints would reappear by morning, no matter what I did. It was like I was being taunted. I started to worry that maybe I was sleepwalking. I didn't have any history of it, but what else could it be? After a few more nights of this, I decided to set up a basic security camera in the hallway, pointing towards the front door. Setting up the camera felt wrong somehow, like I was violating my own privacy. But I needed answers. That night, I slept fitfully, anxious to see what I'd find. The next morning, I grabbed my phone and nervously opened the footage. I saw myself getting up at around 2:30 a.m. I walked straight to the front door and just stood there. I didn't try to open it or go outside. After a few seconds, I turned around and stared directly at the camera. I couldn't look away from the screen. I was just standing there, eyes blank, almost like I knew the camera was watching me. I stared at it for several minutes without moving, then calmly walked back to my bedroom and lay down. I didn't remember any of it. A cold dread spread through me as I realized something was deeply wrong. I kept the footage to myself and didn't tell anyone. What could I even say? Over the next week, I became obsessed with the videos. Every night, the same thing happened. I'd get up, walk to the door, turn to face the camera, and stand there like a statue before heading back to bed. Each morning, I'd feel more exhausted and confused. Was I really sleepwalking? I started searching online, joining forums, and reading everything I could about sleep disorders, but none of it matched what I was experiencing. I wasn't just sleepwalking, I seemed almost aware. One night, I noticed something new. Just as I reached the front door and turned to look at the camera, there was a slight movement outside the frame, like a shadow. I rewound and slowed down the footage. There it was again, a second set of feet, just barely visible at the edge of the screen, shuffling behind me. It was impossible. I was alone in the house. But I couldn't deny what I was seeing. That night, I set up more cameras around the house, covering every angle I could think of. I needed to know what was happening. The following morning, my hands were shaking as I reviewed the footage. I saw myself get up, walk to the front door, and stand there as usual. But then, just a few seconds later, a dark shape emerged from the hallway behind me. It stayed just out of view, as if it knew where the cameras were. I turned and looked directly at it like I was expecting it. Then I walked back to bed, and the shape disappeared. I can't describe the fear I felt watching that. My own body was betraying me, acting on its own. Was I hallucinating? Losing my mind? I had to know the truth, so the next night I forced myself to stay awake. I lay in bed, every muscle tense, waiting. Hours passed. I could barely keep my eyes open when I heard it. Soft footsteps moving across the floor. I froze. They weren't coming from me. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live feed. There I was, standing at the front door, staring at the camera, but I was also in bed, holding my phone, wide awake. My body was moving without me. And then I saw it, the dark shape again, stepping out from the hallway, moving behind the figure that was supposed to be me. It didn't touch me or say anything. It just stood there. I could feel something in the room with me. My skin prickled. The figure on the screen turned its head slowly and smiled. Something I'd never done before. I dropped the phone, and the screen went black. I smashed all the cameras the next morning. I haven't slept since. I can't eat, can't think. I want to leave the house, but I can't make myself move. Every morning, the footprints are still there, leading from the front door to my bed and back again. I'm posting this now because I'm finally leaving. I'm gonna stay with a friend and get some help, maybe therapy or something. I don't know. But even now, as I write this from my friend's place, I swear I hear footsteps at night moving from the front door to the bedroom, back and forth, back and forth. The highway incident. I usually don't drive alone at night, but I didn't have a choice this time. It was a family event, and everyone expected me to stay late. By the time I left, it was almost midnight, and I had a 2-hour drive ahead of me. I remember thinking, just get on the highway, keep your eyes on the road, and you'll be home before you know it. I've always been a cautious person, maybe even paranoid. Something happened a few years back that made me extra wary of being alone in my car, especially at night. But I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on getting home. The highway was almost completely empty, just a few trucks now and then. The darkness felt heavier than usual, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake off a nagging sense of unease. I kept telling myself I was just tired. I noticed a car parked at a gas station I passed an hour ago, but I didn't think much of it. It was just a fleeting glimpse, but for some reason, the image stayed with me. As I continued driving, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a set of headlights far behind me. It was the first car I'd seen in a while, and I didn't pay much attention to it at first. About 10 minutes later, I realized the car was still there, closer this time. I brushed it off as a coincidence, thinking we were just headed in the same direction. But the car didn't overtake me, and it didn't fall back either. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked in the mirror, there it was, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. I pushed my foot down on the accelerator, and the car matched my speed. My heart started pounding as I debated what to do next. Should I speed up? Should I pull over and let it pass? I reasoned with myself. Maybe they were lost, or maybe I was just being paranoid. But as the minutes ticked by, the car moved even closer, almost tailgating me. I thought about calling someone, but when I glanced at my phone, I saw there was no signal, just perfect. Then, a small flickering light caught my attention on the dashboard. I glanced down to see a warning. My car was overheating. That's when I knew I had a problem. A big one. I saw a rest area up ahead and made a snap decision. I signaled and started pulling over, hoping the car would keep going. But it didn't. It slowed down and followed me right into the rest area. I parked under a dim streetlight, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The other car stopped a few feet behind me, headlights blinding me in the mirror. My mind raced. Should I get out and confront them? What if it's some sort of trap? I reached for my phone again and tried texting my friend my location, but the message wouldn't send. I glanced in the mirror, trying to make out the driver, but all I saw was a silhouette. The car's engine was still running, headlights glaring at me. I felt trapped. A heavy silence hung in the air, only broken by the distant hum of the highway. It felt like forever, and then, suddenly, the car's headlights turned off. The darkness swallowed everything. I held my breath, my eyes straining to see any movement outside. Just as I considered starting my car and making a run for it, the lights came back on, almost blinding me. The car started reversing slowly, and then, without warning, it sped off, disappearing into the night. I was left sitting there, trembling, unsure of what just happened. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to get back on the road. I kept glancing in my mirror, half expecting the car to come back. My body was tense, every muscle tight with fear. About 15 minutes later, I spotted something up ahead. My heart dropped. It was the same car, parked perpendicular to the road as if waiting for me. The driver was standing outside, staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his posture made my blood run cold. Not knowing what else to do, I pressed the gas pedal to the floor and sped past. As I looked in the mirror, I saw him running back to his car. Within seconds, the headlights were back, closer than ever before. The car swerved dangerously as it chased me, flashing its high beams repeatedly, almost making me lose control. I was desperate. I didn't see any signs for a police station, and I couldn't outrun him. I saw a brightly lit gas station ahead and made a split-second decision. I pulled in hard, tires screeching. The car followed, swerving around the parking lot before coming to a stop a few spaces away. My eyes stayed glued to the driver's seat, but no one got out. He just sat there, engine idling, headlights fixed on me. I bolted out of my car and ran into the gas station. "Please, there's someone following me," I gasped at the attendant. He glanced outside, confused. "There's no one there," he said. I turned around, and sure enough, the car was gone. I stood there, breathless and shaking, trying to understand what just happened. I stayed at the gas station for almost an hour, too scared to leave. When I finally felt like I could drive again, I cautiously made my way home, every nerve on edge. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something written in the dust on my rear window. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, "I'll see you next time." I didn't sleep that night, replaying the events over and over in my head. The next day, I took my car to a mechanic. He told me both of my rear brake lights were out. A wave of mixed emotions hit me. Had the driver just been trying to warn me, or was it something more sinister? I still don't know. All I know is that I'll never feel safe driving alone at night again. I don't know what his intentions were, but I know I'll never feel safe alone on the road again. The suspicious Airbnb. My partner and I had been working ourselves to the bone for months, so when we finally got a long weekend off, we decided to get away from everything. The idea of renting an Airbnb in a remote area seemed perfect, a cozy, secluded cabin far from the noise of the city. I found this listing that seemed ideal. Luxurious cabin with scenic views, ultimate privacy. The photos looked great, and the host had decent reviews, so I booked it without a second thought. The drive up was nice, but as we got closer, the roads became narrower and less maintained. My partner joked about how it felt like we were driving into the middle of nowhere, and he wasn't wrong. The place was far more isolated than I expected. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, the host was already there, leaning casually against his car. He gave us an enthusiastic wave, almost like he'd been waiting for us for hours. "Welcome," he called out with a broad smile. He insisted on showing us around personally. The cabin's exterior was a bit worn, which surprised me, considering it was listed as luxurious. Inside, it was spacious, but had a faint, musty smell. During the tour, the host seemed reluctant to leave, chatting about nearby hiking trails and fishing spots, despite our polite hints that we'd like to settle in. As he finally headed out, I couldn't shake off a weird feeling. Before he left, I noticed something odd. Every window in the house was tinted from the inside. I didn't think much of it then, dismissing it as just an odd design choice, but it made it difficult to see outside clearly. We spent the evening cooking dinner, drinking wine, and watching a movie. It was peaceful, until we heard a noise outside, like footsteps crunching on the gravel. I froze. My partner brushed it off, saying it was probably a deer or some other animal. Still, I couldn't relax. The footsteps came back, closer this time, circling around the house. I peered out the window but saw nothing in the darkness. When the doorknob rattled, I jumped up. My partner grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door. No one was there. We called the host, but it went straight to voicemail. He'd mentioned earlier that there was poor signal in the area, so we tried not to panic. Then, the power cut out. We were plunged into complete darkness. My phone's flashlight was our only source of light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My partner suggested checking the circuit breaker, which was outside, but when we tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. The same with the windows. That's when we realized they were locked from the outside. Panic set in. I tried forcing the back door open, but it wouldn't give. The windows were all reinforced. My phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it when I saw a text from an unknown number. It was filled with strange symbols and characters, completely unreadable. A chill ran down my spine. It was clear someone knew we were here. We spent the next hour trying to find any way out. We tried breaking the glass with chairs, but it was like the windows were made of shatterproof material. Desperation set in, and we started searching the house for tools or anything we could use. That's when I found it. A door in the basement we hadn't noticed before. It led to a small, dark room. Inside, there were old recording devices and piles of tapes. My heart raced as I read the labels, dates, names, hours. We grabbed a tape marked with our check-in date and played it. It showed footage of us arriving, unloading the car, and settling in. The camera angles were from every room in the house. Someone had been watching us the entire time. Then I heard it. Footsteps, this time coming from inside the house. We hurried back upstairs, grabbing the largest kitchen knife we could find. We hid in a small pantry, listening as the footsteps approached the kitchen. The door creaked open and a shadow fell across the floor. We held our breath, clutching each other's hands until the shadow disappeared. When we peeked out, no one was there. We had no choice but to try smashing a window again. I grabbed the heaviest chair I could find, swung with all my strength, and the glass finally shattered. An ear-piercing alarm went off, the sound so loud it disoriented us. We climbed through the broken window, cutting ourselves in the process, and stumbled outside. Standing in front of us, illuminated by the moonlight, was the host. He was smiling, holding his hands casually in his pockets. "What the hell is going on?" my partner shouted. The host chuckled softly. "Relax, it was just a little prank. Didn't mean to scare you two." "A prank?" I shouted back, anger and fear making my voice shake. "You locked us inside and watched us on cameras." He tilted his head slightly, his smile never fading. "What can I say? I get bored. Watching people squirm, it's entertaining." I stepped forward, but I noticed a small remote in his hand. He clicked a button, and every light in the house flicked on, revealing hidden cameras all aimed at us. "Why don't you both head on home now?" he said softly. "If you can find your way back." He gestured toward the driveway. The road we came in on was now blocked by a large padlocked gate. We managed to climb over the fence and ran down the deserted road until we reached the nearest town. When we told the police, they looked skeptical but agreed to check it out. We led them back to where the house was, but It was empty. No sign of the host. No sign of the cameras. The house looked like it had been abandoned for years. Back at the hotel, I checked my email. There was one from Airbnb. "Thank you for your stay. We hope you enjoyed your time at property name. Feel free to leave a review." But when I tried to click on the listing, it said, "This property does not exist." It's been a year now. Every couple of months, I get an email thanking us for staying and inviting us back. I've never gone back to an Airbnb since. But the last email had something that still makes my skin crawl. A video attachment of us pulling into the driveway and waving at a camera we never saw. The disappearing act, I'm not sure how to start this, but I guess I'll begin with a little background. I'm a pretty average guy in my early 30s, working a typical office job. Nothing really exciting happens in my life. I don't have much family left, and over the years, I've lost touch with a lot of old friends. One of them was Tom. We were best friends throughout high school, but after graduation, we drifted apart. He moved away for college, and we both got busy with our own lives. We hadn't spoken for years until he suddenly messaged me a few months ago, suggesting we go camping together, just like old times. It felt a little strange at first. After all, it had been so long. But the idea of reconnecting sounded nice. I thought a weekend away would be a good chance to catch up. When we finally met up, something seemed off about him. Tom was quieter than I remembered, almost distant. I chalked it up to us being out of touch for so long and tried to brush off the weird vibe. On the drive to the campsite, Tom made this comment that stuck with me. "Do you think anyone would notice if I went missing?" He laughed it off when I gave him a confused look, saying it was just a joke. I forced a chuckle, but a part of me felt uneasy. The first day of our camping trip went by in an odd silence. Tom kept stepping away from the camp, looking around like he was searching for something, or someone. He kept checking his phone too, which didn't get any reception out there, so I had no idea what he was doing. When I asked if everything was okay, he just shrugged it off and asked, "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" That night, Tom woke me up around 2 a.m. He was shaking me, saying he heard something outside the tent. I grabbed a flashlight and we both stepped out, scanning the woods. There was nothing, no sound, no movement. We went back to sleep, but I had trouble drifting off. Tom seemed paranoid, and his questions kept bouncing around in my head. Around 4 a.m., I woke up again and noticed Tom's tent was empty. I called out his name, but there was no response. I waited, thinking maybe he'd gone to relieve himself or decided to take a walk. But minutes turned into an hour and panic started creeping in. I got up and began searching around the campsite, shining my flashlight through the trees, calling his name over and over. It was like he had just vanished. By dawn, I was frantic. I hadn't slept at all, and Tom was still nowhere to be found. I stumbled down to the ranger station, trying to stay calm as I explained the situation. The ranger frowned as I gave him Tom's details and asked me to wait while he checked his records. He came back a few minutes later, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sir, I don't have anyone registered under that name. Are you sure your friend came with you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I stammered, insisting that we arrived together, that Tom was here just yesterday. But when I pulled out my phone to show him the photos I took of us setting up camp, I felt my stomach drop. Every picture was of me, alone. Tom wasn't in a single one. I spent the next hour arguing with the ranger, but there was nothing he could do. His records only had my name on file. No one named Tom had been at the campsite in years. Numb and confused, I drove back to the campsite. Everything was just as I left it, except Tom's tent was gone. I couldn't believe my eyes. I checked our shared belongings, but there was no trace of him anywhere. The only thing left was an old watch he used to wear back in high school. I hadn't seen it on him this trip, yet there it was. lying in the dirt where his tent used to be. Completely rattled, I decided to drive to Tom's last known address, which I remembered from years ago. A woman answered the door, Tom's sister. She looked surprised when I asked about him, but not in the way I expected. Tom, he, he's been missing for 3 years. We never found out what happened to him. I stammered, trying to explain that I had just spent the weekend with him, that he'd invited me on this trip. But she cut me off, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of anger and fear. Who are you? Why are you bringing this up now? She snapped before slamming the door in my face. I stood there, dumbfounded, unable to process what was happening. I drove home in a daze, my thoughts spiraling. As soon as I got back, I checked my phone again. Every chat history, every message thread with Tom, gone. It was like he'd never existed. Desperate, I went through old yearbooks and photos. Nothing. I called a few friends from high school asking about Tom, but no one seemed to remember him. It was as if my memories had been erased, rewritten with blank spaces where Tom should be. Days passed and I started losing sleep. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything. I kept having nightmares about that empty tent, about Tom's watch lying in the dirt. One night, I found a new message on my phone from an unknown number. It was just one line. Forget me. I don't know what's real anymore. I've tried talking to therapists, even the police, but they all think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe Tom was just a figment of my imagination, some delusion I conjured up to fill a void. But something deep inside me is screaming that Tom was real, and something terrible happened to him. I'm terrified of going to sleep now because every time I close my eyes, I see Tom standing at the edge of my bed, staring at me with this hollow look. Every morning I wake up, and I'm not sure if I'm the one who's missing now. The wrong text. I never thought I'd end up writing one of these posts, but I don't know what else to do, and I can't keep this to myself anymore. Maybe someone here has been through something similar, or maybe they have advice. I'm honestly at my breaking point. I'm in my late 20s, and I've been living alone in a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood for about a year. After a rough breakup, I needed a change, a place where I could feel safe and start fresh. It was a nice enough area, and I never had any issues until a few months ago. I've always been careful. I lock my doors, double-check the windows, and have a routine that's hard to break. My friends joke that I'm paranoid, but I just call it being prepared. I've been extra cautious since I started feeling like someone was watching me. It's hard to explain, just small things that made me uneasy, like catching a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or noticing the blinds shifted when I always leave them closed. I brushed it off as post-breakup nerves. That was until the first text message. It came late at night, around 11 p.m. I was curled up on my couch halfway through a movie when my phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number. I see you're home alone. My first thought was that it had to be a prank or a wrong number. I texted back, "Who is this?" But no reply came. After a few minutes, I got up and checked all the locks, then peered out the window, scanning the empty street. I knew it was probably nothing, but my heart was racing. I tried to convince myself it was just some stupid mistake. The next morning, I woke up to another message from the same number. Nice pajamas. Panic washed over me. I looked down at what I was wearing, an old t-shirt and sweatpants. There was no way anyone could have seen me unless they were right outside my window. I rushed to check, but the street was empty. No cars, no people, nothing out of place. I drove to the police station and showed them the messages, but they dismissed it as a prank. Probably some kid messing around, they said. They suggested I change my number and let them know if anything else happened. That night, I sat in my dark living room, blinds slightly open, straining to see if someone was out there. I was afraid, but part of me needed to know who was doing this. Hours passed, and I started to feel ridiculous for being so worked up. Then I got another text. "See you soon." I froze. My hands shook as I called the police again, but they told me the same thing. No threats, no crime. I felt helpless. I couldn't sleep, and every little noise made me jump. I tried staying with a friend for a few days, thinking maybe it would all just go away, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. When I got back to my apartment, I knew I needed to leave for good. I broke my lease and moved across town. The new place was on a higher floor and had better security. I even installed a camera at the front door. Things seemed fine for a while. I was finally starting to feel like I could put this behind me. Then, 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my security app. A video clip showed a shadowy figure standing right outside my door for several minutes before walking away. I stared at the screen, paralyzed. Shortly after, a new text appeared. "You can't hide." I didn't know what to do. I called the building manager and showed them the footage, but it was too blurry to make out any details. They promised to increase patrols around the building, but I could see in their eyes they didn't think it was a big deal. The police said the same thing. They needed more to go on. My fear turned to dread as the texts came more frequently. "Nice haircut. I'd just gotten back from the salon. I like your new lamp." I'd bought new furniture that day. It was like they were with me, step by step. I started seeing a therapist, trying to cope, but it wasn't helping. One night, while I was reviewing the security footage for what felt like the 100th time, I saw something new. The figure walked up to my door and slid something underneath it. A piece of paper. My stomach churned as I unfolded it. It simply said, "We should talk." My hands were trembling so hard I could barely type out a reply. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before the reply came. "I just want to be friends." I threw my phone across the room, screaming. I grabbed my keys, planning to run, but then there was a faint knock at my door. I stood frozen, staring at the door, not daring to breathe. Another knock, softer this time. My mind was racing. I couldn't move. I heard the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. I blocked the number and deleted the texts, but the damage was already done. I barely sleep now. I can't eat. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. I considered moving again, but what's the point? Whoever this is, they'll find me. Yesterday, I was typing out a message to post here, hoping someone might have advice, when my phone buzzed. It was from another unknown number. Did you really think blocking me would stop this? I have no idea what to do next. I've changed numbers, moved apartments, installed cameras, and gone to the police. Nothing has worked. I'm sharing this here in the hope that someone might have an answer, but I'm not optimistic. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, even now as I type this. If anyone has been through something like this, please let me know how you got it to stop, because I don't think I can take this much longer. The workplace stalker. I'm not usually the type to post personal stories on the internet, but what happened to me was so terrifying, I need to get it off my chest. Maybe it will help someone else be more aware before it's too late. My name is Sarah, and I'm 27. I work as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized tech company. My routine is pretty ordinary. Long hours at the office, a tiring commute by train, and occasional hangouts with a small group of friends. I've been with the company for about 2 years, and I have a solid relationship with my team. Life was uneventful until Tom started working with us. Tom was a new hire, a quiet guy in his mid-30s. He kept to himself and didn't seem to fit in socially, but I didn't think much of it. Not everyone at work has to be a social butterfly, right? I'd notice him sometimes lingering a bit too long near my desk, but I brushed it off, telling myself he was just shy or awkward. One morning, I came in and found my desk drawer slightly ajar. I always keep it locked, but there was nothing missing. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly the night before. Then, one evening, I stayed late to catch up on some work. When I was packing up to leave, I noticed Tom standing in the hallway, just staring at my office door. It was after hours, and the entire floor was deserted. I called out to him, but he just mumbled an apology and hurried away. I thought it was odd, but again, I tried to rationalize it. Over the next few days, I started seeing Tom in places that didn't make sense. He'd appear near the elevator when I was leaving, then at the coffee shop I went to before work, and once even in the parking lot of my apartment building. He never approached me or said anything. He just watched. I began to feel uneasy. Was it just a coincidence, or was he actually following me? I didn't want to jump to conclusions or make a scene at work, so I kept quiet. Maybe he was just lonely and didn't know how to talk to people. But one morning, I found a small USB drive on my desk with a label, "For You." Curiosity mixed with dread as I plugged it into my computer. My hands shook as I opened the only file on it. There were hundreds of photos of me, at work, at home on the train, and even in my bedroom, sleeping. My stomach twisted. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? I felt violated and exposed. My first thought was to report it immediately. I showed the drive to my manager, who escalated it to HR and IT. They searched Tom's workstation and computer but found nothing. Tom didn't show up to work the next day. No one could reach him, and they said he'd left no contact information. His absence made my fear grow. Even though he was gone, it felt like he was still watching me. I tried to go about my life, but everything felt off. I changed the locks on my apartment door, switched my train routes, and installed security cameras, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I'd look up from my desk and imagine someone's eyes on me, or wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard something outside my window. One night, I glanced outside and saw a figure standing in the shadows near my apartment building. I couldn't see his face, but my gut told me it was Tom. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They told me there wasn't much they could do unless I had more concrete evidence. They suggested I stay with a friend for a few days. I went to my friend Claire's place. She's supportive but a bit skeptical, thinking I might be overreacting. One evening, when Claire was out, I heard the door unlock. I froze. I hadn't given anyone else the key. I crept into the bathroom and locked myself in, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Through the small crack under the door, I saw a pair of men's shoes, Tom's shoes. He was inside. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom moved through the apartment slowly, stopping outside the bathroom door. "Sarah," he whispered softly, "just come out and talk." I held my breath, praying he wouldn't try to break the door down. The minutes felt like hours. Then, just as I heard him pressing against the door, the police burst in. He was arrested on the spot, but the damage was done. Even with him in handcuffs, I didn't feel safe. The police later told me they didn't find any of the photos or evidence in his possession. They couldn't hold him for long. That night, I realized that I might never be free of him. He'd gotten inside my life, my mind, and my sense of safety. I moved to a new apartment, installed a high-tech security system, and quit my job. Every unknown number that calls or knocks at the door makes me jump. I've become paranoid, hypervigilant, always looking over my shoulder. A week after moving, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Don't forget, I'm still watching." Attached was a photo of me standing in my new living room, taken through the window. I shut my laptop and broke down, realizing I might never escape him. Now, I'm considering leaving town, changing my name, but will it ever be enough? He might not be physically there, but his presence lingers like a shadow. No matter where I go or what I do, I'll always feel like someone's watching. I guess that's the worst part. It's not him that scares me anymore. It's the fear that he's left behind. The Forgotten Hitchhiker. I've been a traveling salesman for almost 10 years. I'm used to long, lonely drives in the eerie quiet of deserted highways at night. I've never really been one to pick up hitchhikers. Too risky, especially in the middle of nowhere. But I guess exhaustion makes you do strange things. It was around midnight and I was on my way back from a business trip in a rural part of the state. My podcasts weren't working due to bad reception, and there wasn't another car in sight. Just darkness stretching out endlessly. My headlights cut through the blackness, but the silence inside my car felt heavy, almost oppressive. It was the kind of quiet that gets under your skin, making you feel like you're being watched. I shrugged it off as fatigue. But then, up ahead, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure standing by the roadside, arm out, thumb pointing up. A hitchhiker, alone in the dead of night. He seemed to appear out of nowhere, almost blending into the shadows. I don't know why, but I slowed down and pulled over. It wasn't something I'd usually do, but something about the way he stood there, looking desperate and defeated, made me reconsider my usual caution. Maybe I felt sorry for him, or maybe I just wanted someone to break the silence. Either way, I rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" I asked. He nodded, a faint smile on his face. He looked rough, clothes dirty, hair unkempt. He slid into the passenger seat without a word. "Name's Dave," he said finally, voice calm but eyes sharp. "Car broke down a few miles back." He didn't have any bags with him, nothing except the clothes on his back. It struck me as odd, but I didn't comment. We started driving, the tension in the car thickening with each passing mile. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "what's a guy like you doing out on the road this late?" I gave him a brief answer, trying to keep it casual. But he kept pushing, asking more questions, where I was headed, if I had a family, why I was driving alone. The questions seemed harmless at first, but something about his tone felt wrong. It was like he was trying to get something out of me, something personal. I tried to steer the conversation away, but he kept circling back, his tone becoming more assertive, almost demanding. I glanced at him, and he was staring at me, a strange smile playing on his lips. When I asked him what was so funny, he shrugged. "I was just thinking about the last time someone picked me up," he said quietly. "Didn't end well for them." I felt a chill run down my spine. I needed to get him out of my car. I scanned the road for any sign of a gas station or rest stop. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a small gas station appeared on the side of the road, its lights flickering like a beacon in the darkness. "I need to grab something to drink," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You want anything?" He nodded, and I pulled in. I bought 2 sodas, but when I came back out, Dave was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Panic set in. I looked around, calling his name, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I got back in the car, feeling shaken. That's when I noticed something in the back seat. A wallet, an old photograph of a young woman, and a small note that read, "Thanks for the ride." My heart pounded as I stared at the items. Where did these come from? Why would he leave them behind? I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? I decided to drive to the nearest town and report it anyway. Maybe they could find out who this guy was. When I reached the police station, I handed over the wallet and described Dave. But no one matching his description had been reported missing, and no cars had broken down on that stretch of road. It was like he didn't exist. The next few days were a blur. I tried to forget about it, but the fear wouldn't go away. And then, strange things started happening. I'd find small items in my car, things that weren't mine: a lighter, a hair tie, a note on my dashboard that simply read, "Found you." I felt like I was being watched, even when I was alone. I started locking my car doors obsessively, checking the back seat every time I got in. One night, I heard footsteps outside my house. Heart racing, I looked through the window but saw nothing. I called the police, but they found no sign of anyone on my property. Sleep deprived and barely functioning at work, I started getting anonymous calls, just static on the other end. One day, I found a small key in my car, a key that didn't fit any lock in my house or car. I was losing it. Was this all in my head? Then, one night, after another series of strange calls, I stepped outside to my car. My breath caught in my throat. Dave was sitting in the driver's seat, smiling at me like we were old friends. "I came back for my things," he said calmly. I backed away, trembling. He stepped out, dropping the small key in my hand. Without another word, he walked away into the darkness, disappearing into the night. I stood there for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do. I drove home, locking every door and window. I sat in silence, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The night passed uneventfully. I tried to return to my normal routine, but the fear stayed with me. I thought about selling my car, moving, anything to escape. A week later, I found a note slipped under my door. "Don't worry, I'll let you know when I need a ride again." I haven't seen or heard from him since. I've tried to move on, but it's hard. Every time I get in my car, I still find myself checking the back seat. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to trust your instincts. Never pick up strangers, no matter how desperate they seem. Because what would you do if you knew someone was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to return? The remote cabin. I never thought I'd share this story, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm a mid-level writer, and a few months ago I found myself on the edge of burnout. Deadlines were piling up, and my creativity was shot. I decided to rent a remote cabin deep in the woods, far from distractions. It seemed like a perfect place to get my life and career back on track. The cabin was nice but isolated, no neighbors for miles, just trees and silence. There was no cell service, and the only way to communicate with the outside world was a rusty old landline phone. It felt strange being so cut off, but I convinced myself it was what I needed. The first few days went well. I wrote more than I had in months and felt a sense of calmness that had eluded me for too long. But there were small things that didn't sit right. At night, I'd hear leaves rustling outside or see shadows flicker at the edge of my vision. I brushed it off as wildlife or my mind playing tricks. One evening, I found a window slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it, but I didn't give it much thought. I chalked it up to forgetfulness and moved on. Then things took a turn. On the fifth night, I heard faint footsteps outside. I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. They were slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a stray dog. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there. I didn't dare look out the window. After a while, the sound stopped, and I tried to go back to work, but the unease lingered. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt around the cabin. They circled the building, leading up to every single window. I stared at them for a long time, heart pounding. They looked like boot prints, definitely not from an animal. Panic surged, but I forced myself to think logically. Maybe a lost hiker had wandered by? The idea seemed plausible, and I clung to it. That night, I sat at the table waiting for something to happen. I kept glancing at the landline, half expecting it to ring. When it finally did, I jumped out of my chair. I picked up, but there was nothing. just silence. I hung up, shaken. The phone rang again, then stopped abruptly before I could reach it. My mind raced. Maybe the wires were faulty? I needed air. When I stepped outside, I noticed something new: a cigarette butt lying near the front steps. I didn't smoke, and there hadn't been any sign of it earlier. My blood ran cold. Someone had been here. I rushed back inside and locked the doors. The following night was worse. The footsteps came back, louder this time. I turned off all the lights and crouched by the window, trying to see who it was. But all I caught were vague shapes in the darkness, melting away whenever I focused on them. My heart pounded as I crept to the front door and tried to leave. My car wouldn't start. I popped the hood and found the wires had been cut. Someone was deliberately keeping me here. I stumbled back into the house and tried the landline. Dead. Every nerve in my body screamed that I needed to leave, but I was trapped. I barricaded myself inside, stacking furniture against the doors. Every noise, every creak and whisper made me flinch. I saw movement from the corner of my eye, but every time I turned, nothing was there. My mind raced with desperate plans. I lit a fire in the backyard, hoping it might attract someone's attention, but no one came. The sense of being watched grew unbearable. I saw signs of forced entry, scratches on the back door, a lock that looked tampered with. In a moment of panic, I remembered the attic, a place I hadn't even considered since arriving. I hesitated but grabbed a flashlight and headed up. As I climbed, a foul smell hit me, rotten and metallic. My pulse quickened. What I found made my stomach churn. There was a makeshift bed, food wrappers, and notes scribbled with disturbing messages. I see you, and you're not alone. My hand shook as I spotted something that made my knees go weak: a list of dates. The dates I'd been at the cabin. I turned to leave, but I heard a creak behind me. A gaunt, disheveled man stepped out of the shadows, a grin splitting his face. He held up my phone and car keys, dangling them mockingly. My body moved on instinct. I lunged, but he was stronger than he looked. We struggled, and I managed to break free, bolting down the stairs. I locked myself in the bedroom, heart hammering. He followed, whispering through the door, "You're not leaving." I heard him moving around the house, methodically blocking off every escape route. My thoughts spiraled. How long had he been here, hiding right above me? With trembling hands, I tried to jerry-rig the landline. To my relief, I got a dial tone. I called the police and screamed for help. Before I could give the address, the line cut off. I slumped against the wall, sobbing. Then silence. No footsteps, no creaking doors, nothing. I strained to listen, hoping he was gone. Hours passed, and I dared to hope. But just as I started to relax, I heard it. The faint creak of the attic door. My breath hitched. He hadn't left. He was still here. The sound of sirens cut through the night, drawing closer. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with dread. His footsteps were getting closer too, descending from the attic. The police were almost here, but so was he. There was nowhere left to hide. I held my breath as the door to the bedroom slowly opened. The last thing I saw was his smile as he stepped out of the shadows, whispering, "You're never leaving." The Good Samaritan. I don't usually post stories online, but after what happened, I feel like I need to warn others. I work night shifts as a nurse, which means I often drive home around 2 or 3 in the morning. Normally, I love these quiet drives. The roads are empty, and it's a good way to unwind after a long day. But a couple of weeks ago, something happened that still gives me chills. It started with little things. I'd occasionally notice a car's headlights in my rearview mirror, seemingly following me for longer than usual, or I'd see the same old sedan parked in different spots along my route. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but it lingered. the feeling of being watched. Then, one Thursday night, I was heading home around 2 a.m. The road was deserted as always. I was listening to a true crime podcast, ironic, I know, when I spotted a car up ahead with its hazard lights blinking. It was parked on the shoulder, and as I got closer, I could see a man standing next to it, waving his arms. I slowed down, debating whether to stop. I'd heard stories of people getting stranded, accidents, all kinds of things. Maybe he really needed help. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and rolled down my window just a crack. "Please," he called out, rushing over to my car. "My wife's hurt, and I don't have service. Can you help me lift her?" "She's unconscious in the passenger seat." His voice sounded desperate, but something about it felt off. He wasn't making eye contact, and he kept glancing back at his car. I offered to call 911, but he cut me off, his tone suddenly sharp. "No, there's no time. You need to come with me. Please, just help me get her out of the car." I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't know what it was. Maybe the way his voice changed, or the fact that I noticed a faint shadow moving behind his car. Someone else was there. I tried to stay calm and told him again, "I'll call an ambulance for you." He took a step closer, his expression darkening. "No. You need to come now." That's when I saw it. A second figure stepping out from behind the car, just a blur in the darkness. I didn't wait. I hit the lock button and floored it. The man's face twisted into something terrifying as he slammed his hand against my window. I sped off, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was no longer acting desperate or pleading. He was just standing there, watching me. And then, more men emerged from behind the car. There were at least 4 of them. My hands were trembling as I tried to keep my car steady on the road. My mind raced. Who were they? Why were they hiding? Why did he lie about his wife? I shuddered, realizing just how close I'd come to stepping out of my car. I drove straight to the nearest gas station and dialed 911, but when the dispatcher started asking me questions, I struggled to explain. Did I really see other men? Was I sure there was someone behind the car? Maybe I'd imagined it. The dispatcher said they'd send a patrol car, but the way she asked me to repeat details made me second-guess myself. I hung up, my heart still racing. I glanced at my phone and froze. There was a new message from an unknown number. "You got away this time." Panic flooded through me. I never gave him my number. I hadn't even gotten out of the car. The text wasn't a coincidence. It was meant for me. They knew who I was. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake off the dread. I kept replaying the scene in my head. What would have happened if I'd stepped out? I tried to put it behind me, but then, a few nights later, it happened again. I was driving home after another late shift when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They were closer than usual. I sped up, took a few unexpected turns, but the car followed every move. My pulse was racing. Were they back? How did they find me? I debated driving straight to the police station, but fear paralyzed me. What if they already knew where I lived? I decided to head to a friend's house instead, somewhere I'd feel safe. As I pulled into her driveway, the car that had been following me drove slowly past. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. It didn't stop, just kept driving, like it was sending a message. I rushed inside, shaken, and for the first time, I told my friend everything. She suggested we check my car. I thought she was overreacting, but to our shock, we found a small magnetic GPS tracker under the bumper. We destroyed it immediately, but the realization hit me hard. They knew where I'd been. They'd been following me for days, maybe weeks. I wasn't just a random driver who got away. I was a target. I switched cars with a family member, started staying at friends' houses, and even took a few days off work. I shared my story online to warn others. Most people were supportive, but a few comments stood out. Some mentioned similar encounters in the same area. Others said I wasn't safe yet. Just as I started to feel a little more secure, I received another private message on Reddit. You may have changed your car, but we still know who you are. I decided to leave the city altogether. I moved states, cut ties with familiar places, and tried to disappear. I stopped posting updates, hoping that going offline would help me fade from their radar. Months passed. I finally felt like I could breathe again. I got a new job, a new routine. But last week, I received a postcard at my new apartment. There was no return address, just a single line written on it. You got away once, you won't get away again. I'm posting this because I need people to know. If you see a car with its hazards on, think twice before stopping. You never know who might be waiting for you in the dark.